Hello everyone, welcome to 3D6 Down the Line. My name is John. Welcome to our final chapter of our Dolmenwood deep dive, where we're going to be taking a deep look at Book 3 in the upcoming Dolmenwood tabletop role-playing game currently on Kickstarter. Book 3 is the campaign book for referees only. If you haven't already, please go check out the videos or podcasts for parts 1 and 2 covering both the player's book and the monster book. There will be links below where you can find those. And of course, if you haven't already, please go to the Kickstarter page, which will also be linked down below, where you can make your pledge for the Dolmenwood tabletop role-playing game. And if we haven't convinced you already that this is going to be a game worth supporting, I don't know what else I can do for you. Hopefully this third video will put you over the edge. And just to reiterate what I've stated before in my previous videos, I'm not being sponsored nor paid by Necrotic Gnome nor Exalted Funeral. These opinions are my own. If you're looking for a reasoned critique of the pros and cons of the Dolmenwood tabletop role-playing game, you're going to have to look elsewhere. I am heavily biased in favor of the game, having run multiple campaigns over the years, and I love it, and I just want to share that love of the game with all of you out there. One of those campaigns has been recorded by myself and my friends. It's freely available to watch on 3D6 Down the Line. You can also, of course, watch it on YouTube or listen to it on your favorite podcatcher of choice. It's a 22-episode-long campaign, and it should give you a well-rounded picture of the game itself. Highly encourage you to check it out. All right, so let's not waste any more time. Let's get to this third and by far the largest of the 3 Dolmenwood books in the upcoming game. Here we have the third and final cover by the artist Ulla Thanel, who has done all of the covers for each of the 3 books. This one looks to be a trio of witches amongst a circle of nodal stones being watched over by, dare I say it, witch owls, perhaps? And it's very evocative of the setting. Love it. All right, moving in. Let's go. Okay, just like the other 2 books, we have a wonderfully laid out 2-page spread of a table of contents. Very easy to find and parse what you need. And of course, all of these are fully hyperlinked. So if I'm looking to find out more information on magic weapons, I can simply go over here, click on it, and voila, we get to jump right to that chapter. Lovely. So what are we going to be taking a look at here for the campaign book? Well, first of all, it should go without saying before you dive in too much deeper that if you plan to be only a player in an upcoming campaign of the Dolmenwood role-playing game, you should be looking no further. Every single page in the campaign book reveals secrets, and the best part about Dolmenwood is exploring and uncovering those secrets. So if you're a player, you should stop watching or listening right now. Go and tell your would-be referee that you really, really would like to play in a game of Dolmenwood and have them check out this video so that they can go over to the Kickstarter page and pledge. All right, for those who are still with us, the referees, the elite. Let's take a look at what we got here. First of all, the secrets of Dolmenwood. It's going to give you all of the aspects of the Dolmenwood setting that make that setting so unique. And then we're going to move into the factions and powers. Factions play a huge role in any Dolmenwood campaign. And there's going to be a full breakdown of the 16 settlements that you can actually wander into in a game. Rules for exploring the wild. And then what makes up the largest section of the book are the hex descriptions themselves. 200 fully detailed single-page spreads covering every single hex in Dolmenwood. Amazing. We're going to dive deep into that. Campaigns in Dolmenwood is going to give you a lot of advice as a referee for best practices in shaping and running a game of Dolmenwood. And then Treasures and Oddments, which is going to detail all of the valuable items and rare goods that you're going to be able to uncover in a game. And then lastly, a smattering of Appendices. Okay, so let's dive into part 1, the secrets of Dolmenwood. So it opens up with, "Welcome, Master of Dolmens. The scroll of lore is unfurled and the telling of Dolmenwood begins." I love it. He immediately calls out the fact that you're going to be equipped by reading this book to run long-term campaigns in Dolmenwood, which is amazing. Tells you to read the player's book first, because that's going to give you your basic lore. And then he dives down into the 2 different campaigns that you may want to run here, a player-driven campaign or a plot-driven campaign. For those who are familiar with the OSR or the old school style of role-playing, the player-driven campaign is definitely my preference. And it's, all of the campaigns that I have run in Dolmenwood have been player driven, where this is the traditional Hexcrawl style. And Gavin clearly states here that with very little preparation, you can just start play in a settlement, present the players with some rumors, and away they go. And you're basically reacting as a referee to the players' actions, which is how I prefer to play the game. Maximum player agency. And here he also says that when you're awarding XP, the standard rules for old school play, where you are awarding XP based on monsters defeated and treasure recovered, work great, which is the XP system that he gives here in this game. Alternatively, there is the more modern plot-driven campaign, and I appreciate the fact that he does give you guidelines for how you might want to run a plot-driven campaign, but let's face it, folks, it ain't as great as the player-driven one. We all know. And then, of course, the usual exhortation to make Dolmenwood your own. Ignore what you want, keep what you want, and mold it into whatever version of the setting you like, which I can speak from experience is definitely the best way to play it. All right, he goes over what we can find in the books. We kind of already went through that with the table of contents, and let you know that you do need the player's book and the monster book for the complete experience. All right, starting play. So he gives you immediately guidance right up front, useful for the referee, and how to actually start a game in Dolmenwood. He doesn't front load you with all of the lore information, all of the history, and all of the descriptions of what you can find in the world. He says, what do you really need to know right off the bat? How do I start a game of Dolmenwood with my friends? Tell me how to do that. And he gives you this advice right off the bat. I love it. 2-page spread. Once again, you can see the mastery of layout and information design. And right on the left-hand side here, he says the campaign begins. When you're starting a new campaign in Dolmenwood, the following steps are recommended. Boom, 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 boom. 1 through 6. Pick a starting settlement. Just grab one from the chapter and put the players either entering Dolmenwood for the first time or having already been natives of Dolmenwood. And not only does he tell you to just pick a settlement, he gives you suggestions. So if they are not native to Dolmenwood, have them start in Lankshorn or Castle Brackenwold. We'll find out why in a bit. If they're natives to Dolmenwood, have them start in Prigwort or Dreg. Great starting locales. Gives you concrete advice for where to start. Read the info on the settlement. Look at the map. Focus on the overview. Read the nearby hexes, right? Look at the hex that the settlement is in, then look at the adjacent hexes so you know where the players are likely to go immediately upon leaving the town. Place optional adventures. If you've got any adventures that you want to integrate into the setting yourself, you can do that. Prepare some rumors. You can go over to the settlement rumors part of the book and just seed some rumors there for your players, and then begin your first session. Nice and outlined step by step by step. Here's how you begin a game. He also gives advice here for the wider world. If you're going to be placing the woods of Dolmenwood within a larger campaign setting, perhaps your own homebrew setting, he gives you some advice here about how you might accomplish that. For myself, I contemplated doing this, but I felt that I wanted to lean into everything that Dolmenwood had to offer with as minimal distractions as possible of anything larger going on in the world. So when I felt that Dolmenwood did need to be placed within the context of a larger world, but I only briefly sketched, usually in relation to the larger political scene in which the Duchy of Brackenwold, of which Dolmenwood is a part of, what that duchy is also a part of, a larger empire, basically, is the brief amount that I actually expanded upon the larger world. But he gives you some nice guidelines for that as well. And then he gives you some advice for actually dialing up and down the different dominant themes within Dolmenwood. Whimsy and horror, the actual time period analog in our real world, which is late medieval, but there's a little bit of early Renaissance in there as well. Fairy and its denizens, and the role of the church. You can kind of dial these up and down depending upon what you would like to focus on in your campaign. Then we start moving into the details, and these are just fantastic. I remember seeing the early PDFs of this, and this section here is what made me fall in love with the setting, was just sort of reading about the different areas. That Dolmenwood is not a homogeneous setting. Yes, it has overriding themes of the whimsy and the horror and the fairy tale aspects and fairy, but there are different sections of the wood that actually act as mini settings that you can kind of traverse in between. So What's really great about this breakdown here is that on every page, he includes a larger map of Dolmenwood with the indicated regions highlighted on the map, which is really great. So first up, we have the Aldweald, which is the largest geographical area in the Dolmenwood. It's basically everything east of the Hamath minus one section called Mulch Grove. This is relatively civilized and well-traveled. It has a lot of the human nobility stamp over the woods. And it has a few of the more important settlements that are within, Prigwort being the main one, the village of Odd, Meagher's Reach in the far northeast, the ruined Abbey of St. Clwyd, which used to be the pinnacle of the church's reach within Dolmenwood before catastrophe struck that place, and the Groaning Loch upon which Castle Harrimore looms over. We have the Dwelmfurl, at least that's the way I pronounce it. I'm sure I'm screwing that up. In the west, and this is an area of rocky highlands that it basically surrounds Lake Longmere, and it is the heartland of the Droon, and it is bounded in a perfect circle by the ring of standing stones known as the Ring of Chell, and it basically wards against the return of the Cold Prince, whose major castle is on the shores of Lake Longmere. It prevents the Cold Prince from returning and dominating the land with another eternal winter. Then we have some smaller areas here. We have the Fever Marsh, which is in the north, which is a stagnant lowland where there's a bunch of weird outcasts who kind of hang out there with some fairies and fungi as well. And there are signs of ancient human habitation up there because a lot of the early humans that migrated into the wood came from the north, and some of the remnants of their civilization actually still reside in Fever Marsh. We have the small region of Hag's Addle, southeast of Lake Longmere, which is the winding, swampy section of the River Hamath that is dominated by the hag herself. Very, very dangerous, but you can find some really, really sweet and rare herbs down there. And the predominant settlement is at the very southern end of the Addle, which is known as the Woodcutter's Encampment, which is really, really fun place to go visit. We have a very large section in the southwest called the High Wold, which is the northern part of a larger barony that's to the south of Dolmenwood. And it is dominated by the Bregel lords of House Merkin and House Malbleet and House Ramius. But it's become sort of a Wild West sort of area because of the lax rule of the Baron Hogwarsh in the capital at High Hankel to the south. We have Lake Longmere itself in the center of the Dwelmfurl, which is the center of the major mysteries of the setting itself, the crux of the central conflicts within the setting all reside beneath the deep waters of Lake Longmere. Mulch Grove to the east is a fungal forest with lots of bogs and strange dank mushroom and fungi growths that is dominated by mosslings. And we have the Nagwood, which is the most dangerous section of the Dolmenwood, wholly corrupt by the Nag Lord himself, Atanaway, reeking of chaos taint. It's in the roots and the waters all the way down to Lake Longmere, and his minions of Crookhorns dominate all that they see in that area, and he attempts to spread his chaos throughout the rest of Dolmenwood. We have the Northern Scratch in the northwest, which is a windswept bog of sorts. Very wild, not a lot of roads to travel on. The Table Downs stretch across the northern border of Dolmenwood, which is basically a range of hills, and this is dominated and dotted with all the relics of those ancient humans that used to live up in the north. And to the southeast, we have the Tithelands, which are the civilized and pleasant rolling farmlands dominated by the capital of the duchy itself, Castle Brackenwold, where the Duke Thespian actually rules from. And lastly, we have the Valley of the Wise Beasts, a small sliver of land sandwiched in between two rivers bordering the Nagwood, inhabited primarily by Cobbins, which I went over in part 2 of the Dolmenwood Deep Dive, the monster book, which you should go check that out. All right, then we have a great but blessedly short section on the history of Dolmenwood. I highly suggest everyone take a look at this because it is really fascinating, and the way that Gavin delivers the information makes it actually an enjoyable read instead of a typical lore dump. First thing to notice here is that there is no actual current year. There is no naming conventions for the timeline itself because he wants you to put it into your own campaign setting. So everything here is said a number of years ago. This happened 1,200 years ago, 400 years ago, and then you can make up what year you would like based upon the calendar in your own setting. And what I love right off the bat is that the left sidebar here is an overview. He gives you every single major entry and just gives you a quick little brief summary. So you can just look at this, parse this real easily, and get a firm understanding of the past history of Dolmenwood. I found this really, really useful whenever I was asked questions by players in the midst of a game. I could flip to this sidebar very, very quickly and just be able to refer to things off the cuff very easily by just looking at this sidebar instead of having to parse all of this other information. Now, I'm not going to go through every single entry here, but let's give like just a real quick summation of basically the sweep of history here. So in the prehistorical days, the wood was dominated by these things called wood gods, one of which was known as Geloff, who lived in the waters of Lake Longmere and whose dominion was the waters and rivers and lakes of Dolmenwood himself. And via these waters, he was able to regulate the arcane energies of Dolmenwood. So the wood gods eventually came into contact with the fairies who traveled from their fairy realms, loved the place, and set up shop. The most dominant among them was the Cold Prince, who basically dominated with an age of eternal winter. And it was during this time when the Bregel, the goat people, actually first came into Dolmenwood and started to serve the fairies. The Cold Prince gets bored because that's what fairies do. They get bored and he withdrew and nature sort of takes over. And in this period of time is when the mysterious Droon, the first humans, actually make an entrance into the wood itself and start to set up shop. Because they are arcane hoarders of secrets, they immediately are attracted to Geloff and they bind him and they're able to harness his power. And the Droon become more powerful than they have ever been since. This is the height of their power. At the same time, probably of the same ethnic stock, the woodcutters actually enter in and actually set up shop within the center of the wood. And the Bregel switch from serving the fairies, who are basically absentee landlords, and actually end up serving the Droon. Well, that didn't last long because the Bregel hero Hregel actually ended up stealing one of the most powerful artifacts of the Droon and disappearing into the ley lines. There has been a rift between the Droon and the Bregel ever since. In the wake of this, the Brackenwolders themselves actually come up from the south. They bring with them the Pleuratine Church and their religion, and they start to establish trade with the peoples in the wood at that time as well. Castles and shrines are built all over the place. The Cold Prince suddenly realizes that everyone's kind of been screwing around in his wood. He comes back from Phrygia with all of his Frost Elf minions and throws the land into an eternal winter again. This time, however, the mortals aren't having any of it, and they all go to war, mostly in the High Wold in the southwestern part of the forest. 3 factions actually unite where they normally wouldn't. The king, the church, and the Droon actually come up with a plan called the Triple Compact, where they use their powers to actually realign one of the ley lines and divert its power to create a circle that actually wards the Cold Prince and forces him back into his realm of Phrygia and prevents him from ever coming back again into Dolmenwood. However, peace doesn't last that long because then the chaotic spirit known as the Naglord actually arrives on the scene, and he takes control of one of the nodal stones and twists it and taints it, and then it sends the corrupting influence down the waters into Lake Longmere and causes Geloff to actually fall asleep within the mud of the bed of Lake Longmere. And Geloff's dreams spawn his alter ego known as Big Chook, which is a horrible, awful beast. Well, with Geloff corrupted and the control of Geloff wrested from the Droon weaken and have to pull back, much to their dismay. And results of that corrupting influence also caused the demise and destruction of the capstone of the Pleuratine Church within the forest, which is the Abbey of St. Cloud, which falls into complete ruination. The church itself has to pull back. A lot of the shrines are lost. The Droon are in retreat as well, nursing their wounds and holding grudges, while the Naglord in the north becomes a dominant corrupting power in Dolmenwood. And it is this land that you walk into and begin your campaign. I did not do that justice at all, but you should definitely read those entries. It's mere like 3 pages or so, and you can get the full flavor of the historical background of Dolmenwood. We then have a lovely 2-page spread, as most of the book is, detailing ley lines and standing stones. I love this aspect of the game and the setting. The presence of these stones, of course, lends the game its name, Dolmenwood. Dolmens themselves are these standing stones, which are dotted all around. And the ley lines themselves are marked at regular intervals by these monoliths, by these nodal stones, and they all have magical effects. So as you can see on the map here on the right-hand side, there are a number of major lines. I believe there are, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. One of them, of course, is the Ring of Chell in the west, which is dominated by the Summer Stones, which keeps the ward against the Cold Prince in place. However, there are these other crisscrossing ones, Ewer and Hode and Lamb, each one of them with a distinct flavor. The line of birthing, the line of woe, the line of ravens, and each one of them has an arcane scent. So if you are an arcane spellcaster or someone here who is tapped into the arcane, perhaps an enchanter or a magician, when you are in a hex that has a ley line crossing through it, you actually sense the feel of the ley line itself. For instance, the line of ravens, Ewer, which crosses from the southwest to the northeast. The arcane scent is the distant moaning of the dead. I was constantly telegraphing this to any of our players in my multiple campaigns. For some reason, Ewer kept on coming up a lot. That they were hearing the moanings of the dead in their head, and it took them always a few sessions to figure out that, oh my gosh, this was actually the characteristic of the ley line that was going through this land. And it also has a mechanical benefit that it enhances certain kinds of spells. So, for instance, Ewer, the saving throws versus necromantic arcane spells, those dealing with death or undeath, are made at a -2 penalty. It's pretty cool. And there are a number of lesser stones as well that aren't detailed on this map, and each hex description that has a lesser stone usually will detail the effects of those stones. And then a really cool little addendum here is the presence of these Vorpal monoliths. So there are rumors amongst those who know of the arcane, hint, hint, the Droon, that there is a direct east-west line that is probably going to appear because there are these monoliths that sort of phase in and out of existence depending upon what season it is, that are colored. So you have the red, the blue, the gray, and the yellow monoliths. You can see them in the map there. And it looks likely that it will end up manifesting a brand new ley line. Then they leave that up to the referee to decide what the outcome of that will be. And then there's a lovely chart here detailing every single one of the nodal stones, its name, its ley line that it resides upon, the guardian, because there's usually an Odrune guardian that has been assigned to watch over and guard each of these nodal stones, and then a hex number where you can find more detail on them. And I can only assume that because these are all underlined, that at some point in the final product, these will all be hyperlinked, so you can jump right to the hex and find out what you need to know. I love it. And it goes into more detail about the all-important Ring of Chell, the great warding ring that keeps the Cold Prince from returning from his realm of Phrygia and plunging the Dolmenwood into another eternal winter. This is the irony and tragedy of the Droon made manifest, is that they are trusted by no one. They are dangerous, they are hoarders of secrets, and they do not brook anyone trespassing upon their territory. However, without the Droon, no one would be able to ward against the return of the Cold Prince, so they are actually the greatest protectors of the wood in the present day. It is all fully detailed here in the Ring of Chell. What's great here is it tells you how it was formed, what the ring is made up of, the different summer stones. Then on the right-hand side here, it actually tells you what the possible effects would be should some of these summer stones fall. So if you disturb one stone, this happens, and 2 stones in this. And finally, if 4 or more stones are actually disturbed or fall, the ring falls apart, the earth shudders as the energy of Ewer violently returns to its natural course, and then the ban is broken and the Cold Prince can enter freely back into the mortal world. So it's almost an endgame scenario. These 2-page spread basically tells you the endgame of Dolmenwood, possibly, should the worst happen. Very, very cool. Lovely 2-page spread here on the shrines. I went over a little bit of this in the player's book when we're detailing the cleric and the friar and holy magic, is that there are these lost shrines. They're dotted throughout Dolmenwood. You have a great map right here where you can immediately see where they're all located, plus another table that is going to be hyperlinked with all of their locations. And you can see here by the chart that the bold entries are actively used shrines. So there are still shrines that are in villages or in towns or settlements, but there are a number, all the ones that aren't bolded, that are actually lost. And these are the ones that you can actually restore. So should you restore a lost shrine or visit an active shrine, you can actually receive a blessing which is tied to the saint that the shrine is dedicated to. And if you are a divine spellcaster, you can actually cast that spell. You have the spell memorized until you actually cast it, and then it is gone forever. However, what's really cool is if the spell is of a rank higher than what you would normally be able to cast, you still get to cast the spell, which is really, really cool. Because if you hear a rumor about a lost shrine dedicated to a particular saint, and you know what spell is associated with that saint, that could be the seed for an adventure, because you are not limited by your level in your class. You simply just have to get to the shrine in order to learn that spell and be able to cast it. So if you have, for instance, a party member who is on the verge of death but needs a cure disease spell cast upon them, but you don't have a cleric or friar who is powerful enough to actually cast cure disease, what can you do? Right? There are a number of different options, of course, but one of them might be to find the shrine that is dedicated to the saint whose associated spells cure disease. I can't think of who that is off the top of my head. And then that becomes an adventure, because you know that should you be able to find that shrine and restore it, that you could actually get that spell and cast it upon your friend before they pass away. Really cool stuff. After this, we have a number of different spreads that are all related in one shape or form to fairy. Fairy has a huge role to play within Dolmenwood and provides much of its flavor. There are a number of different regions within Dolmenwood that have fairy aspects to them, and there are a number of ways to actually enter into the fairy dominions themselves. So you have fairy doors that will grant access. You can see that there's a chart right here, all hyperlinked with where those doors are and where they lead to. Some of them actually lead directly to fairy realms. Some of them lead to fairy roads. And then there are other strange ways of actually accessing fairy, which I just love. There isn't like just a system, a unified system. It's weird and capricious and odd, just like fairy itself. So you have something like the Duke's pale ships, for instance, the pale ships of the Duke who cherishes dreams. What a great name for a fairy lord. May sometimes be sighted on the waters of the Dark Mirror, which you can find in Hex 1802. That's up in the northeast. The mortals who get aboard will be transported to Hypnagogia, the Duke's domain in fairy. Really cool way to get into fairy, right? Or the Goblin King's name. You have a very particular ritual that you have to abide by here. You look into a mirror, you call out one of the names for the Goblin King, and you'll be whisked away to the Goblin Market. This is something that is known by most Druins so that they can visit and trade in arcane goods in those markets. Lots of fun stuff right there. So the fairy roads themselves, this is really fun. I had a great time using the fairy roads in my campaigns. You know what these are like is they are like fast travel in video games. For instance, you can get from one end of the wood to the other. They are not without risk, however, but should you be able to traverse them, you can cut out a lot of time and danger that you would have to go across the entire woods themselves. So you have to know where the entrance to the road is, how to get into it, and then how to actually traverse along the road. So the rules for travel do abide here. They are very similar to the normal rules for travel through Dolmenwood. They're slightly different. First of all, of course, is that the normal chance for getting lost is non-existent because you're actually following a road, so there's no chance of getting lost. And then the encounter tables are also wholly different. So you would roll up to 3 times per day. You would roll a d6, and on a 1 to 2, you encounter a monster. And you would roll 1d20 on the fairy road encounters, where you can see them all listed there. And if the roll comes up at 3 to 4, you would actually roll a location. And there is a location table for each one of these roads. They're all unique, which is fantastic. And then on a 5 to 6, nothing happens. You don't want to stray too far from the path, because then time will pass in the mortal world. And you can see that there is a chart here rolling 2d6. And it could be just a few minutes. It could be a number of weeks, which is really, really fun. So in the Dolmenwood campaign that you can watch or listen to on 3d6 down the line, they did do this. They entered, I believe it was the White Way, so a gravel road that twists through a gloomy, bewildering twilight forest, utterly colorless. Yeah, so they entered through the Mizzle door in Hex 1207. I remember this. And then I ended up rolling on the location chart. And let's see if I can remember here what exactly they came across a crumbling mausoleum that stands beside the road, its doors slightly ajar. And inside there was a staircase that led down to a stretch of corridor which eventually emerged in the catacombs of Tallowspire, which is actually a fairy realm. They desperately wanted to check out where that staircase led. However, caution was the better part of valor, and they did not. However, they hid in this mausoleum. I remember clearly when they saw that Droon were actually marching on the road as well. And then we have details on the fairy nobles themselves and their dominions. These are really evocative. They are not fully detailed out. Obviously, that Gavin wants the focus to remain on Dolmenwood. However, he does encourage you to use your creativity to flesh out these dominions and have adventures within them. There's enough there to kind of build off of. I would hope that probably in the future there would be actual source books or supplements detailing each of these dominions. I thought that would be really, really fun. So we have a number of different and interesting and unique fairy nobles. It shows the whole breadth of what fairy lords can actually be. The Blind King, the Cold Prince himself, the Duke Mayfleur, the Duke who cherishes dreams. And you can see here on the map that there are some fairy lords that actually do still have dominion in certain parts of Dolmenwood. And you can see, of course, that that dominion has retreated a fair amount, but they are still there. The Earl of Yellow, that's a real fun one. He is a mirthful ochre-skinned satyr with horns of shimmering ivory and a mane of radiant gold. So he actually rules a realm near the center of Dolmenwood itself. And Prigwort, which is a bustling, populous town in the center of Dolmenwood, is actually under his dominion. And there are rumors that the brewmasters who actually rule Prigwort actually receive the secrets of their delicious brew from the Earl himself. It's pretty cool. The Goblin King is a really cool shout out to a certain movie that a lot of us probably fondly remember from childhood. I don't think I need to go any further there, but there is definite allusions to that particular movie. The Hagthorn Rosie, King Pusskin, who has a lot of association with Grimalkin. The Lady Belladonna, the Lady of Midnight, the Lady of Spring Unending, Lord Gladhand, Prince Mallowheart, Princess Andromethea, the Prince who is 7, the Queen King Hathor, Queen Abyssinia, and the Queen of Blackbirds. Each one of these details their fairy realm that they dominate, and if they are able to be found in Dolmenwood, what those encounters might look like. And then going even further back in history, before the fairy lords had dominion in Dolmenwood, we look at the wood gods. So these are godlings in status. They are not as powerful in reach in men's minds as the god of the Plurtine Church. However, there are certain factions and peoples who still pay homage to these gods, especially the ones that are known as the Gwyragons, that are served by the witches themselves, who enter into communion with one of these Gwyragons and gain powers from them. The Gwyragons are Imbala, Erta, Hasturiel, and I believe Limud, yes, are the Gwyragons. But we have ones like Ambule, which is a great picture right here. They're always associated with some part of nature. Ambule is the manifestation of the mutability of earth from silt to mud to rock. Cornus, the green man, close ally of Geloff. Plants was his dominion. Imbala was this kind of a horrible looking creature, it looks to me, a gargantuan lamprey-like monstrosity with 7 spherical eyes. Pretty nasty. Manifestation of the cold depths of the Groaning Loch, which is a long, narrow lake between cliffs. And Imbala used to be the most primary among the Gwyragons themselves, and some say even all of the wood gods, she was the primary, but now she is in a comatose slumber in a deep crevice somewhere. And the mirrors of Imbala, which was the only way for the witches to contact her, have been lost, and therefore the most powerful Gwyrgon cannot be accessed by the witches themselves. And we have a long entry here on Geloff as the most important to the setting itself, about how it was bound by the Droon in ancient history, and then was corrupted by a Tanaway, and now has this connection with its dreams, where it manifests Big Chook, which is a monster of violent temperament and horrid aspect in the lake itself. And it gives you a little section here upon what would happen should Geloff be awoken, or if Geloff would be slain. Another endgame scenario for the entire game and the setting. And we have a few more here as well. The Myconome is really cool, kind of disturbing, very fun. I had a lot of fun with the manifestations of the Myconome in the setting. Its association with mosslings and fungi. It's sort of like a hive mind, very alien, highly intelligent, and can manifest anywhere where there's fungi. Really, really fun. And lastly, we have Yorgon, the Stag Lord, which is depicted here in this wonderful painting. It's associated with the deer of Dolmenwood in the forest's hidden springs and grottos. However, recently, Yorgon was actually decapitated by the servants of the Naglord, and now his antlered head actually is a centerpiece behind the throne of the Naglord himself at the Sargstone. Yet his body continues to roam the woods, which is highly disturbing. I love it, though. Okay, let's dive into part 2, factions and powers. So there are 7 major factions that are all vying for either political or military supremacy within the wood itself, and we get a fully detailed section on each one of these factions and what their motives are, their overview, the map showing where they dominate, and discussion of their schemes and goals. We've got a great chapter heading painting here by Paula Hananiemi, depicting the Triple Compact and the raising of the Ring of Chell. And we start off right away with the most dangerous and chaotic of all the factions, Atanawe. Atanawe is the 9-legged chaos godling and its horde of wicked minions. So Atanawe is not native to Dolmenwood in any way, shape, or form. It comes from some different plane or some different land. It's a completely alien thing. It's a horrific being, basically chaos manifest. And you can see how well the information design works here for each one of these faction descriptions. You have an overview of particular items of note associated with the faction itself. So we have for Atanawe, for instance, that it's alien to Dolmenwood. It entered 400 years ago. It took the Sargstone away from the Droon. Its minions are called to the Court of Chaos, which is around the Sargstone. It was the creator of the Crookhorns, which we detailed in part 2 in the monster book, and it poisoned the wood god Geloff. And its nature, the fact that it's a godling of absurdity and dark comedy and destruction and debauchery, and it is also the ruler of the Valley of Wise Beasts, those poor little cobbins to the southeast. And then in each faction description, it describes the faction's schemes, what it plots to do, how it plans to advance its aims and motives within the wood itself. This is great fuel for a referee to determine the overall sweep of a campaign's themes and how PCs will actually interact with this faction and how they might butt up against each other, the PC's goals versus the faction's goals, or how they might ally at the same time. So for Atanawe, for instance, it actually wants to become the ruler of all Dolmenwood. It wants to take over the world, right? It cannot abide the thought of mortals who live free from its command and seeks to increase its dominion to encompass the whole of Dolmenwood and then the lands beyond. That's a pretty broad, overreaching goal, but obviously, that is going to be a source of conflict for anyone who is adventuring within Dolmenwood. A more realistic goal that might be able to be targeted by the PCs is that Atanawe wants to collect the bones of holy people. So Atanawe has come into the possession of several saints' skulls, relics basically, and is thought to revivify them for the amusement of the court. Highly disturbing. Now, this could be a seed of adventure for the referee to give to his PCs. If, for instance, you're in a settlement deep within the woods and you find out that the local church's relic has been stolen, that might be a clue to the PCs that there are agents of Atanawe hiding in town or perhaps just outside of town, right? Something like that. And then in each one of the factions, it gives you a map here where it shows where they have dominion or where they have a presence. So you can see here that the primary dominion of Atanawe is Nagwood and the Valley of the Wise Beasts. However, there are places where you will see influence of Atanawe even outside the borders of his dominion. So even in the south in Dreg and the cottage of Shub's Nana, you are going to find something having to do with Atanawe. All you have to do is look down here on this chart, which describes them, and you can see here the village of Dreg will have a hyperlink to its hex, and you will find the hiding place of the Atacorn Cruithiant. The faction details are extensive, so it is not on simple 2-page spreads. However, the information design quality still pervades throughout each entry, of course. So you have members and organizations, so it tells you who the actual leader is, Atanawe, of course, and then the creatures or beings that serve the faction. So we have Atacorns, Crookhorns, Harpies, monstrous humanoids, Harridans, and corrupt unicorns. All of these were actually in the monster book itself. And we have a nice little chart here of Crookhorn names, which I really, really like, and I've definitely used many, many times. And then on the facing page, we have a horrid but awesome depiction of Atanawe itself and a full stat block for the Naglord. And I'm not going to go into detail, but you do not want to come into contact with the Naglord itself. It is a level 22 creature. I think by far the most powerful of any entity within the wood. And then we have stat blocks for some of the primary NPCs associated with Atanawe. We have 2 Crookhorn Lords. The Baron Lucius Fragglehorn is actually the Crookhorn that rules over the Valley of the Wise Beasts. And Shub's Nana is a corrupt Breggle who keeps Atanaway's larders stocked with plump human children. Once again, one of the running horror themes of Dolmenwood is the danger to children. In my in-person game, I actually rolled a random carousing roll, which ended up manifesting Shub's Nana to our druid in the party, who was actually a small boy. And that ended up not going great. The Cold Prince. So even though the Cold Prince has been banished, he hungers to return and wreak vengeance upon those who banished him, who all are in power now, the Droon, the Church, the Duke. And we have details here about what his schemes are in order to do that. You can see that he has been thoroughly thwarted in Dolmenwood, based upon the maps here. The ruins of Horblight Keep in the northwestern part of Lake Longmere are in the center of the Ring of Chell, and it is those ruins that they guard against the return of the Cold Prince. However, there is still an embassy that has frost elves that you can actually visit within that ring. Gavin has hinted that he would love to actually create a dungeon, perhaps even a mega dungeon of sorts, associated with Horblight Keep. I think that would be wonderful, but don't wait on Gavin. Do it yourself. Make your own mega dungeon. And we have the members and organization, the Prince himself, Frost Elf Courtiers, and the Soldiery. We have a really cool D20 table, both male and female, for Frost Elf names that fall in line with the naming conventions of elves as seen in the player's book. So we have names like Mantle of Snowdrift, Raven's Cold Call, Twine for the Mayball. Like lovely, lovely names. I just love them. The ambassador at the embassy himself. I love the way this guy looks. He looks like Louis XIV. And we have a complete stat block for the Cold Prince himself, who is not someone you wouldn't want to mess with. Then, my favorite, I love him, the Droon. The sinister cabal of sorcerers who covet occult knowledge above all else. You can see that their dominion is the Dwelmfurl itself. And talk about schemes. These guys have schemes. They want to reawaken the entity Geloff. They have never been more powerful than when they actually had control of Geloff and were able to actually siphon its mastery of the arcane powers of Dolmenwood for themselves. So they are vehemently against the presence of Atanaway, who has put Geloff to sleep. You can see here they want to trap and subjugate Atanaway. That's what I like too, is they don't want to just get rid of him. They lust after Atanaway's power, which is fantastic. And they also want to locate a disturbance upon the ley line Ewer. They have a number of different enclaves, mostly associated with nodal stones, for which there are Odrune that are guarding them, scattered throughout Dolmenwood, which means that the Droon can be present throughout Dolmenwood. You don't need an excuse to actually get the PCs into the Dwelmfurl. They can be encountered in a lot of different places. As I told you before, I had them actually encounter Droon along the ferry roads because I figured the Droon would be a faction that would know and utilize the ferry roads whenever possible in order to travel in between distant parts of the wood. So members and organization, they are ruled by the Elder Fanatarch, known, as you can see on the facing page here, as Caduceus Doom, one of the coolest names ever. And it also details the members of the Aegis, which is their high council, and the breakdown of the different types, which are all detailed stat-wise in the monster book. And we have a really cool table here of Droon names. As I told you before, this is where I came up with Hecator Unlight, the Droon who was infiltrating the incandescent grottos. The human nobility. So this is a huge power within the wood, of course. You can see by the map that there are a number of different domains, each ruled by a separate house. It is a basic feudal system, so they all are vassals of the Duke, who resides in Castle Brackenwold, Duke Thespian. And so there are a number of houses. The way that I like that Gavin has laid it out here, that he doesn't just list the names of the houses, he gives you sort of these descriptive adjectives associated with them, so you can get an immediate general sense of what we're looking at here. So the dreaming nobles of House Gillifer, House Harrimore, harried by Atanaway. A little alliteration there, I love it. The lax rule of Baron Hogwarsh, the fungal deterioration of House Mulbrick, and Lord Nodlock, a lackey of Lord Ramius. And then it has the general schemes overall by the human nobility itself. Want to maintain their lordship, so they want to maintain the status quo. They want to get rid of Atanaway. They want to claim the wildlands to the north in the Table Downs. And they want to root out the Droon, because no one likes the Droon, unfortunately. And of course, they have a number of different enclaves. A lot of them are settlements that are detailed further on in the book. We have a lovely table here of noble and knightly names, which gives you a nice look at the naming conventions of the peoples of Brackenwold that entered into the forest. And we have not stat blocks, but we have full breakdowns of each one of the important nobles associated with the houses. We have the Duke and his wife, the Duchess Ophelia, and I believe all the heads of the houses afterwards. And as you can see, as I described in the monster book, it gives you entries here for their demeanor and their speech. So it tells you how the person talks. So the Duke himself has measured sonorous tones to his voice. And most importantly, it tells you what their desires are. And when you're entering into faction play, which is a huge part of any Dolmenwood game, knowing what the leaders of the factions want is absolutely essential. So let's take a look at, for instance, the Lady Theatrice Harrowmore. So the Lady Harrowmore rules on the banks of the Groaning Loch, and her lands abut the Naglord's domain. So she is the human noble most closely associated with the war against Ottanowe. What does she want? The return of her missing daughter, Violet, to brace the defenses of mid-Dolmenwood against the mustering Crookhorn armies of the Naglord, and to discover whether the folkloric Naglord is truly the force behind the Crookhorns. Spoiler, it is. If any of you are fans of my Dolmenwood campaign that is available on 3D6 down the line, you know that I took this desire and ran with it right off the bat as one of the rumors that the PCs could find within Prigwort, which is a town that is actually under the rule of House Harrowmore, is the return of her missing daughter, Violet. I ran with that, and the PCs picked up on it, much to the dismay of my players in the end. We have the Baron Sagewine Hogwarsh, who is the ruler of the High Wold, Lady Pulsophene Melbreck, the Lord Harold Nodlock. And then we move into the other side of the nobility that is also ruled over by the Duke, which is the Longhorn nobility, which hold equal power with the humans themselves. Ramius, Merkin, and Malbly, all dominating in the High Wold and all scheming against each other. These guys are absolutely fantastic. We have noble Breggle names, which is great for spur-of-the-moment questions about what the name of this particular Breggle is, and we have these great portraits. I just love these portraits of each of the lords themselves, Malbly, Merkin, and Ramius, and each of their desires. And their machinations are so fun to play with. In my last and final campaign was completely focused on the interplay and rivalry between these Breggle lords. The Pleuratine Church. So this is the dominant religion that we talked about previously in the Player's Book when discussing the holy magic and clerics and friars. It is a Roman Catholic analog where the worship of saints is primary. It is an evangelistic church, and they are trying to spread their word. However, they've had to retreat in recent years because of the demise of the ruined Abbey of St. Cloud at the hands of the servants of Ottanowe. And we can see here that some of their schemes are to locate and restore the shrines that they've had to retreat from, rebuild the abbey, stamp out the Droon and the witches who are heretics, of course. And they have a number of different enclaves. Of course, in all of the major settlements, there's going to be a church presence of some sort. We have the members and organizations. Of course, the saints are the most exalted on top. The bishop himself, which you can see over on the right here, the Bishop Sanguine, resides in Castle Brackenwold. We have the clerical orders. Remember that clerics are actually the military arm of the church themselves, and that is why they are playable as characters, because they go out to evangelize the word of God. The priests themselves, who actually take care of the populace. Monastics, there's only one monastery in Dolmenwood, the Refuge of St. Key. And of course, we have the friars, who are wandering ascetics, who only have a very loose attachment to the overall structure and hierarchy of the church, and which are also a playable class in the game. We have a great chart. 100, the 100 Saints of Dolmenwood. If you want one at random, you can find it here just by rolling a D100. And you can see that the 34 major saints that are detailed in the Player's Book, which you can see in part 1 of my deep dive, are listed here in italics. We have the notable personages here. These are the 3 heads of the 3 military orders of St. Cygnus, St. Sedge, and St. Faxus. They all have their own desires and demeanors all laid out here. And the witches. So this is a super secretive faction. On the one hand, it's probably what you think, and on the other hand, they're completely different. So yes, there are covens. There are 13 of them. They only allow women into their circle, and there is a number of rituals before you can actually become a witch and gain their powers, which are all detailed here. However, their nature where they derive their power from is highly unique. As I described in the Wood God section, they actually enter into spiritual communion with these beings known as Gwyragons, which is a small selection of the ancient wood gods that used to be the original rulers of Dolmenwood. And after this communion, they become a witch. They actually become the Gwyragons' eyes and ears within the wood itself, manifesting that particular wood god's powers within the wood. And you can see that their primary goal is to maintain the secrecy of the craft. And one of their big ones and which they tell no one, is to recover the mirrors of Mbala, which are those items that have been lost, which were the only ways to communicate with the lost Gwiragon Mbala of the Husk. And here we can see the members and organization, the Gwyragons on top, of course, the eyes of the Gwyragons, the priestesses, which actually head up a coven and determine when they meet. In the high priestesses in the high coven, there is a high priestess, which is usually associated with a certain geographical area of Dolmenwood, and then the queen of all witches herself, which is Selenia, which you can see here on the right side. Really cool chart here for determining a coven name randomly. So you just roll a d20 twice, and you can combine the first element and the second element. So we could roll, just picking one at random, 12 Silent and 5 Elm. So the coven of the Silent Elm. These are the high priestesses. Yes, so we have Gruith the Scaled of the south, Lady Imelda, who is the high priestess of the north and west. She is actually related to the Lady Harrimore. Sadewin Galbucket, high priestess of the east, and I believe she actually lives within the House of Sleep, right beside the nobles of House Gillifer. Yes, she does. And then after detailing all of the factions, we have a couple of overall sections that are based upon the interplay between the factions themselves and the factions NPCs, which is really, really useful. So you don't have to go into a single faction's entry to find out how it's going to play with and interact with the other factions. You simply come here, look up the faction name, and you can see a clear list of how it interacts with all other factions. So if we look at the Plurtine Church, we can see that it's unsure of Atanaway's true nature. It hates the Druin of the Witches. It dismisses the Cold Prince, tolerates the Longhorn nobility, and is allied with the human nobility. It gives you a little bit of detail on each one of those. This is the same for each one of the relationships, so a referee can clearly see where the pressure points are and where are the strings that can be pulled by both the referee and the players when interacting with the factions. Excellent stuff here. And then the next spread details factions and adventurers. So once again, it goes through each one of the 7 factions and tells you what the faction thinks of adventurers specifically, and gives possible hooks for interacting with those factions for the PCs to pick up on. So picking one at random, let's look at the Longhorn nobility. So the Longhorns have their own servants, but they frequently have need of unaffiliated agents, adventurers, to do their dirty work, often against rivals of their own kind. You can see that I obviously read this entry for my latest campaign when I was focused on the Briggle Lords. So what affiliation could adventurers have with the Longhorns? Adventurers of a compatible alignment who are willing to swear fealty to a Longhorn noble house may be accepted into its service. Those who prove themselves trustworthy and discreet will be assigned ever more sensitive or dangerous quests and granted ever greater favor. While it is rare for non-Longhorns to rise far in the ranks of a Briggle noble house, it is not unheard of. What possible rewards could you gain by entering into the service of one of the lords? Gold, political favors, rank and title, land, good stuff. And then he provides example quests. Sample quests for each one of the 7 factions. For the Longhorns here, one possible one could be spying on other nobles. Longhorns will take any opportunity to insert spies into the midst of their rivals. So if you're working for House Ramius, he might send the PCs to go spy upon House Malbleet, for instance. Assassination or kidnapping, simple and brutal methods of eliminating rivals, usually performed by unaffiliated brigands so as to give plausible deniability. Skirmishes. In times of war, adventurers may be enlisted to serve in war bands or mustering armies. So if you enter into the service of House Merkin, for example, when he decides inevitably to make his move against the weak human house of House Nodlock, perhaps he will send in your PCs to do a little recon first. And an interesting little throwaway sidebar up here in the upper right, we have questioned Druin and Witch player characters. Throughout the years of Dolmenwood's development, many people have asked Gavin, are we going to have playable rules for actually playing a member of the Druin or a Witch? They're treated here as NPC-only factions, but rules for player character Druins or Witches, along with the secrets of their magic, may appear in future supplements. Such a tease, such a tease. And then lastly, to round out the Factions and Powers chapter, we have two particularly unique factions who are actually single individuals that are factions in and of themselves. We have the Hag, who is the decrepit old crone who has complete dominion over the section of the wood known as Hag's Addle, and the sorceress Igraine Mordlin, who rules over the Chateau Mauves and the town on the banks of the Dark Mirror known as Meagher's Reach. And it is worked up in the same way that any other faction is. So it tells you what their schemes are, how they interact with adventurers, and what possible interaction there might be with PCs. Okay, moving into part 3, settlements. So there are 16 settlements that are fully detailed in this book that your adventuring party can visit. Each one has a highly stylized and wonderful map painted by the great artist Arlen Ortiz. We'll briefly run through all 16 of them. I'm not going to go through the full details. That would take too much time, of course, but we'll focus on one in particular, one that I have a lot of experience running. And we'll use that as a template so you can see how the information for each settlement is broken down by Gavin. So real quickly, going through each of the 16 settlements. First off, we have Blackswell, which is a mulch grove village. It's decaying because it used to be a mining town, but that wealth has since dried up. I believe Blackswell will also be the focus of one of the upcoming adventurers that's going to be published as part of the Kickstarter. I believe it's called The Fungus That Came to Blackswell. So you can look forward to that. We have Castle Brackenwold, which of course is the capital of the Duchy of Brackenwold and is where the Duke himself resides. It is the largest city by far, also has the largest entry. Cobden on the Shiver, which is the village of Cobbins, unfortunately ruled by Crookhorn ruffians. Dreg in Shantywood Isle, which is at the far eastern limit of Lord Malbleet's realm, and it is a down and dirty place, but it's very, very fun. We'll go over that in a minute. Fort Vulgar, which is upon the northern banks of the Lake Longmere and is a center of the river trade. High Hankel, which is the capital of the High Wold, the other city-size settlement in Dolmenwood other than Castle Brackenwold. This is where the Baron Hogwarsh rules lightly. Lankshorn, which is also in the High Wold. This is a great starting town for adventuring parties who are new to Dolmenwood or not native to Dolmenwood. Meagher's Reach, which is a small village in the northeastern part of Dolmenwood, ruled by the mysterious sorceress Igraine. It is a town that is lost in time. Odd, which is within the domain of the House Gillifer, is a really fun town which always has its name changing every time you walk into it. Orb Swallow in Moat Grove is highly unique. It is a mossling town and reflects their unique culture. A lot of fun. Prigwort, which is a lot of people's favorite starting town. It was my starting town for my original Dolmenwood campaign, both for the one that is available to watch on YouTube and also my in-person campaign, my first in-person campaign. It's in the heart of Dolmenwood. It has everything an adventuring party could need as a home base of operations and lots of really cool plots. It's a fantastic, fantastic starting town. The Woodcutters Encampment, which is at the end of Hag's Addle, has a populace of people who are actually from the original ethnic stock of humans that came out of the north. And they have in recent years forgotten the lost art of what's known as furnjing, which is the magical shaping of wood. So let's go back to Dreg and take a look at what each of these settlements entries really look like. Dreg in Shantywood Isle. So right off the bat, of course, on the very first spread, you're going to see the map by Arlen Ortiz. I love these maps. I love them so much. They look highly stylized, but they're actually highly useful at the table. Any of the major sites that are detailed in the entry for the settlement are going to be shaded a different color than the surrounding building. So you can see here in the map of Dreg and Shantywood Isle that those that are sort of a pinkish red color are going to be the dwellings of note within the town. You get a nice little brief summary of what the general flavor of the town is, how many people are in it. So Dreg has 300 people and it's a village size. Its ruler, so it's notionally ruled by the goat lord Malbleet, and is representative in the village, which is known as the Burkmaster Monoclese. But here, uniquely to Dragon Shantywood Isle, the Madame Shantywood, although she has no legally recognized position, practically runs the entire place due to her economic clout, and she rules upon Shantywood Isle, of course. And then religion. So how religious are the people here? Ostensibly devotees of the church. The rowdy folk of Greg have a tendency towards godlessness. Go figure. And then there are a number of bolded entries right at the beginning that a referee should take into account to get the full picture of what the town is going to be like. So the river trade is very important here, the River Hamath, both east and west and north and south. The fact that there is the Adicorn's miasma here, so unknown to the people. The reason why everyone's so mad and corrupt here is because there is actually a servant of Atonaway who is hidden in the town itself. It is famed across the wood for its bog swine sausages, and of course, most famous of all is the existence of Shantywood Isle. It is a high-class brothel which is on an island in the midst of the Hamath and is ruled wholly by the Madame Shantywood, and she has no political allegiance whatsoever. It is basically like a little mini city-state all to itself. Every entry gives you an immediate useful information, which is usually what player characters are going to want to know, which is the availability of equipment. So here in Dreg, you can see that standard equipment is available at normal prices. Vehicles and mounts, however, are 50% higher priced than usual. Mercenaries can only rarely be hired here, and unusual specialists like sages and spies cannot be located. I love that. It gives you an immediate sort of picture of what the economic readout is for each town in a manner that is immediately useful to player characters. The facing page for the initial entry for every settlement is the map, of course, and it gives you a key to that map. It tells you in a sidebar what law and order is like and how they might manifest on the scene, because if one thing PCs do very well is that they get into trouble when they are in town. This gives you the information that you need right off the bat to get them back in line. So here we have the Dread Constabulary. It tells you what they look like, what their livery is like, how fast that they arrive on the scene should a crime be committed, how many of them that there are, can they be bribed, and what their combat stats are like. Here they refer you to the Dolmenwood Monster Book and look for the level 1 fighter entry. Most flavorful of all, however, and what I really enjoy the most out of any part of any of the settlement entries are these encounter charts. There's always one for the daytime and one for the nighttime. Much like the encounter charts, basically any charts in all of the Dolmenwood game, as you've probably seen so far, is that each one of these entries can be a little mini adventure in and of itself. So I'm going to pick one at random here, a day encounter in Dreg, number 6. 1d3 of Hogbeard Zealots pulling a, quote, sinner to the church. We look over to find out who Hogbeard is, and we can see on the left-hand page here, there's a nice sidebar here of this Brother Hogbeard. He's a level 3 friar, and he looks to be a little bit of a zealot. So he's become the leader of a band of religious vigilantes who dispense justice in town. So Dreg is a lawless town, basically. So he's taken it upon himself to be vigilante justice, and of course has probably made things worse in town. You see his speech is bombastic and doom-laden. He wants Dreg to be freed of sin. He wants to be canonized, of course. And then it gives a little bit of information upon his zealots, these yellow-smocked converts to his cause. I believe in my in-person game, the PCs got real fed up with Hogbeard's antics and actually took him out into the woods and slew him. So, town's probably better for it in the end. But you can see quickly that you can generate an encounter with Hogbeard with his zealots, pulling this sinner to a church, and it immediately provides a dilemma for the player characters to interact with in much the same manner that these dilemmas are generated in the monster entries in the monster book. Then for each one of the keyed locations here on the map, there will be a detailed entry, going in order, I believe, from 1 to 14. Very easy to find, yes. So you have right here, Ditchway. Sometimes it's just a road, and it'll just kind of let you know a little bit about it. There will be a hyperlink here, leads to the market town of Lankshorn, the Ditchway, so you can just click right away and find out where about Lankshorn. We have the Mermaid's Arms, which is an inn, and as I described in the player's book, this is an example of where each one of the inns and taverns and pubs and all that kind of good stuff that's scattered throughout these settlement entries, each one is wholly unique with its own flavor, its own proprietor, its own fare, and what is offered there. There's always some sort of interesting little hook in there that'll make you want to go to the inn or interact with the inn. So it's not just a typical visit to the inn and you pay your money and call it a night. There's always something interesting going on to distract the players or invest them further into the setting. So let's take a look at the Mermaid Mermaid's Arms here. It's the only reputable inn. That's the very first thing of note. I remember this was the first thing that the PCs in my game actually noted, was this is the only decent looking place in town. It's a little more than a cottage, but it's homely and well maintained. The inn is known colloquially as the Mermaid's Arse. So already there's just like a little tongue-in-cheek, little throwaway humorous line there. Every single inn and tavern has an entry dedicated to what its sign looks like outside. It doesn't seem important, but that is the very first thing that adventurers would see when they're approaching an inn, is what the sign looks like. And Gavin takes the time to let you know. That is the very first piece of information that a referee would give to his players. The sign of the Mermaid's Arm is a mermaid on the seashore, bashfully hiding her modesty with her immaculately braided blonde hair. It's fantastic. Just a little bit of flavor, just to throw away. Always tells you what the common room is going to look like. Dark beams, floorboards decked with round woolen rugs, the scent of wood polish in a cheery fireplace conjure an atmosphere at once welcoming and intimate. And the sign reads, no gambling, lewdness, or sea shanties. And customers are served by Ogham Tweed, the bartender. Who's Ogham Tweed? Well, it's bolded. So if it's bolded, you know that it's going to have a sidebar with a detailed entry on that NPC. Probably on the same page, if not on the facing page, so you don't have to flip. Ogham Tweed. We look right over on the right here. There he is. He's a level 3 thief. He is the Mermaid's Arms bartender. Gives you a clear physical description of what he looks like, his demeanor, so you can immediately have some role-playing touchstones, how he's going to interact with the player characters. He is charming with an edge of cautionary bravado. He clenches his fists on the bar, actually gives you a little bit of business to do. His speech, you know I love the speech. He's consciously hushed, bursts of loud guffawing. It's fantastic. And his desires, what does he want? He's not just an innkeeper. He is a living and breathing human. What does this person actually want? Can the players use that as leverage in negotiations or adventures, right? Ogham wants word on the whereabouts of his ex-flame, One-Eyed Gil, whom he has not seen in 15 years since the night they fled the grounds of Red Wraith Manor following an aborted burglary. Are you kidding me? In that small little entry, that is an entire adventure right there. First of all, you know that One-Eyed Gil is bolded. So his ex-flame One-Eyed Gil is going to have another entry of their own on page 101. I happen to know that One-Eyed Gil is actually in Castle Brackenwold. We know that he hasn't seen her in 15 years, and they fled the grounds of Red Wraith Manor, which has a hyperlink to Red Wraith Manor, which is the domain of the Lord Malbleet, who actually rules over Dreg from afar. There is so much potential adventure in that, and all you would have to do is sit down and have a beer with Ogham to find this out. Regardless of whatever else is going on in the campaign or the adventure at the time, here is another hook for you. I love it. It's so good. Going back to the entry here is guests. What the guests are like. So what is the vibe in the room? Just not only what the common room looks like, but what is the quality of the clientele, right? Here we have a courteous mix of travelers and locals wishing for a quiet drink away from the crowds. And there is a 1 in 6 chance per evening of the inn's proprietor, Tamron Tweed, sitting in the corner drinking quietly by herself. Who is Tamron Tweed? It's bolded. You look over, there's the entry right there. She is a level 5 magician. She has a frizzy mane of white hair, and she's the owner of the Mermaid's Arms, but she lives in the attic suite above where she does experiments, right? And we can see that Tamron desires to uncover the cause of the growing violence and unrest in Dreg. We know as referees that the source of that is the Atticorn, the service of Etonaway that is actually hiding in town. So Tamron could be a possible ally should the PCs think to ask her. And then for every inn or tavern, we have a bolded entry at the end of it that describes the services that are available, because of course that is what the PCs are probably entering into the inn in the first place to get. So we have lodgings and food. We have common quality. We know that there is a chart of common quality lodgings and food in the player's book that you can just reference, and it tells you what kind of lodging it actually has. 3 2-bedrooms and a single private room. What I love about most of these as well, especially at the inns where food is served, is that you can obviously just roll on the common quality chart back in the player's book, which, as we went over, is wildly inventive and creative. But even more creative, Gavin has usually added an entry for a particular dish that is offered at certain inns that is usually reflective of the culture or perhaps the proprietor themselves. So here we have Tweed's fish pie, said to be the best in Dreg. It's baked fresh and every day, and it gives you a price for it. Great flavor. We have details on the Burkmaster's Manor. The Burkmaster is Lord Malbleet's mayor in town. And we have a number of possible adventure seeds here. Interesting thing about the manor is it's raised on stilts for when the river floods. And details on the Burkmaster Monocles himself. His desire is that he is tired of his wife's long illness and wishes for her to either be healed of her afflictions or to pass peacefully. So, and then if Hilda dies, he actually wishes to marry the Madame Shantywood. I thought this was fantastic, and I sort of rolled with it and said that the Burkmaster actually had ill will towards his ailing wife and actually was looking actively to have his wife meet with an untimely end so that he could further his romance with the Madame Shantywood. Nasty stuff. And we have details on the church. There's usually a church or a chapel or a shrine in each one of these settlements. Always gives you a entry for the church figure that is in charge. Here we have the Reverend Mother Chandra Hadelreath, who's the vicar of Dreg. Gives you a full workup of what Chandra is like, what her desires are. Her desires to be left in peace and not to be dragged into the unrest. So it looks like she has given up on the godless folk of Dreg. We have an entry here on the smokehouse, which is actually where the Atacorn has dwelling, the polluter in the dark. It's lurking in the dark recesses of the smokehouse, and it dissolves into gaseous form at night, and it infuses the smoking fish in the smokehouse with its corrupting miasma. And we get details on this awful man thing, this Atacorn, servant of Etanue, and it desires to corrupt mortals to eat human children, a pleasure in which he only occasionally indulges so as not to draw attention, of course. And as you can see, for each of these NPC entries, each one of them has their desires. Each of these are levers to be pulled and possible seeds for adventures. It just goes on and on and on. An unending font of creativity. It boggles the mind. Let's count. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 fully detailed NPCs, each with their own desires, each with their own adventure seeds. That is within one of the 16 fully detailed settlements, of which Dreg is one of the smaller, and that's just the settlements. Then you have all the NPCs that are in the hex descriptions themselves. You can see how the creativity is compounded, how there is a never-ending source of adventure as you just sort of wander and crawl your way through the Dolmenwood map. I hope that I'm able to convey the scope of the creativity and what you're about to dive into when you start your Dolmenwood campaign, just based upon this small little entry of Dreg and Shantywood Isle. It is so enjoyable and it is so easy to access for the referee and to build off of and react to your players as they push and pull these strings. Amazing, amazing stuff. Okay, part 4, Exploring the Wild. So this chapter in the campaign book for referees basically builds upon the travel procedures that were on that 2-page spread in the player's book and gives more detail for the referee to interact with the players as they move through this Hexcrawl campaign. First, we have the seasons and the unseasons. Really, really cool. So it gives you the full calendar here for Dolmenwood, letting you know what the different flavors of the 4 seasons are. And this unique thing about Dolmenwood is that there is the chance of these unseasons sort of taking over at certain times of the year. So hitching, for instance, occurs on Dolmen Day, the last day of the year. There's a 1 in 4 chance of hitching commencing. So it's never a sure thing, but it might, and that could change things vastly. Unfortunately, in none of my campaigns did we ever actually enter into an unseason. For all of my campaigns, it was always vague that had the chance of appearing. There was only a 1 in 10 chance, however. And we never hit that one, but lots of cool stuff can happen. And you can see here that when you do roll a random encounter, there is actually a chance, 2 in 6, if you're in Came or Vague, that you will actually have a different encounter table than the normal encounter table for Dolmenwood. You have full details here of sunrise and sunset, should you need to know. I think this is kind of fun because that can often determine when you start the adventuring day, how many hours of daylight you have, which is important to note for whenever you are traveling. And this 1-page spread on weather, I have used these tables probably more than any other. I love these tables. I use them basically for any game I'm playing. If you watch my Halls of Ardenvoul, despite the fact that it doesn't take place in Dolmenwood, I use these tables to roll upon whenever we determine what the day's weather is like. They are highly evocative. I definitely recommend using the optional rule for weather effects because travel is such an important element of any Hexcrawl campaign. You should definitely take a look at the effects here, in that they will actually impede travel or have poor visibility or have wet conditions so you can't make a campfire, that sort of thing. And it's a 2d6 roll for each one of the main seasons and 2 of the unseasons that would actually have weather appropriate effects. Strangely enough, for both of my campaigns in Dolmenwood, I had the players roll what the starting season would be at random on a d4, and it was winter for both of them. 2 hilarious and detrimental effects for both parties. It's a lot of fun. Winter can be brutal for travel just based upon what you're rolling in the morning on this 2d6 roll. It's no good. There were plenty of times, because both groups started in Prigwort, where they actually decided not to go adventuring that day because there was a blizzard and they just knew that there was going to be death or probably dying out in the cold regardless. So they stayed in town. Now, as just described, as you can see, staying in town is an adventure in itself. There's so much to do in town. You don't feel like it's actually a hindrance of any sort. You can still have a lot of fun and adventure in town, so it's not a big deal. However, if you are traveling, the very first thing that you would roll at the start of the day is getting lost. Now, getting lost, of course, is a common thing to check for in any Hexcrawl campaign, in any game that you're playing in the old school style. However, Gavin makes it, of course, very, very unique to Dolmenwood. So if you do happen to roll and you do get lost, it is a 3d6 roll, which means it has a bell curve. So the middle of the chart is what you're more likely to hit. And you can see here that the more likely ones that you're just going to travel in a different direction. However, the more rare results that you may hit are the more fantastical and fun ones here. If you roll a 3, very difficult to hit, but if you do, you're lost in time. Travel is along the intended course, but 1d4 plus 1 days pass instead of just the single day that you thought. Or 18, you're enveloped in a bewildering fog. You emerge at the end of the day in a randomly selected hex, at least 2 hexes away from the original hex. That's amazing. And the players don't know where they are, right? So they have to figure out just from context clues and asking questions and interacting with the world around them to figure out where they are. You have a chance of actually stumbling into a randomly selected ferry road. That's a lot of fun. In my in-person game, we actually rolled a 17 when we got lost one time, and we hit this one, which is you were knocked unconscious by flashing colored lights. You awaken 1d4 hours and later in a hex of a randomly selected nodal stone. Let's see, if we go to the map here real quick, and we zoom in, they were based in Prigwort, and I can't remember which hex they had traveled into, but they went into a hex and we rolled. They got lost. I hit the 17, and then I rolled randomly to determine which nodal stone they were. I went back to the ley lines chapter and rolled on the nodal stones chart, and I rolled randomly, and luckily for them, what I rolled was the baffle stone. Bad things happened at the baffle stone, but once they figured out where they were, it was very easy for them, of course, to travel back to Prigwort. But that was just a random roll. They could have ended up, all the way up here at the end stone or at the earth stone or something like that. And then the campaign would have taken a whole different direction just from a random getting lost roll. It's amazing. I love stuff like that. Then we have the encounters chart. We sort of went over this whenever I did my walkthrough of random encounter generation flow for the monster book. So you were basically at the start of the day checking in the daytime to see if you hit a random encounter. And if you do, you would roll on these charts. You would determine what that encounter would be. If you end up rolling regional on this first chart, you get to look at where they are in Dolmenwood and roll on a regionally specific chart, which is really, really fun. So the monsters are actually a little bit bespoke depending upon where you are in Dolmenwood. And then at nighttime when you actually camp, depending on whether you have a fire or not, which I love using the camping rules, there will be a whole different selection of possible encounters as well. We have the different activities that you can do while exploring the wild. This is highly unique to Dolmenwood. I love all of these. They're fully detailed with procedures. We have fishing, foraging, and hunting. Each of these has rules for what happens if you're doing it while traveling, while actually moving through a hex, and if you dedicate yourself for an entire day's worth of doing the activity. Of course, if you dedicate an entire day, if you're willing to spend the time, you're liable to get more fruitful results. Each of these will yield a certain amount of benefits for the party, usually in the terms of rations, right? So fishing, the yield would end up being 2d6 fresh rations should you succeed on this. Foraging, 1d6 fresh rations. Hunting, the yield would be based upon the hit points of the game animals that are actually killed. But what's really fun about these are the listings. Each of these is a wealth of creative information. So this is just fish, and most of them have some sort of really cool mechanical benefit. So let's look at Maid of the Lake. So if you succeed at a fishing check, you can roll on a 1d20 and determine what you caught. So we rolled a 10. Maid of the Lake. The thigh-sized pink translucent squids, renowned as a Dolmenwood delicacy. Their flesh is succulent and has a mildly fruity flavor. And according to folklore, feasting beneath the moon on these squids fried in garlic butter is a sure way to summon the attentions of a witch who will visit in the dead of night. That is fantastic. That leaves it up to the referee to determine if that rumor is actually true. But of course it's going to be true, right? I mean, why would you deny that to a player character? I think that's fantastic. And this is just flavor for a random fish that you caught, and you've got 20 of them. How does Gavin have the time to come up with this? I don't even know, but I love it. Let's look at foraging. Different charts for edible fungi and edible plants. Rules for identifying each of these. And let's pick one at random. We have Scraby's hair for a fungi, rolling a 15 on the chart. Mud brown wispy filaments that ooze a lime green gel, smell like beer and taste like a bland, mealy porridge. Right? Let's look at a plant. Snodberries. Snodberries. The tiny blue berries of a horridly thorny bush. The odd bittersweet taste does not make them worth the scratches entailed in harvesting them, but they grow in vast quantities so can at least provide a solid meal. So there's no mechanical benefit here, but still has taken the time to give you a full write-up on what they look and taste like. Great. Hunting. So there's a procedure here for hunting as well. You have to stalk the animal by rolling a survival check, determine what the actual quarry is, and then you actually have to move through the combat rules to actually see if you can take down the creature. In my campaigns, if what I rolled that they were hunting was not an aggressive creature, I usually said that the hunting was successful no matter what, as long as they could stalk it correctly. And then you're basing how many rations you're able to harvest from the creature based upon the number of hit points that the creature had. And there are a number of different charts here that you can roll on to determine which game animal you stalk depending upon the terrain that you are in. Now, the meat of the book, the vast majority of the book, is descriptions for each of the 200 hexes that are on the Dolmenwood map. This is the true genius of the entire product, in my opinion, are these descriptions. So first of all, looking at the map, you're feasting your eyes on this map here. This is a Hexcrawl game, which means that the purpose of the game is exploration and uncovering the secrets that all of these hexes have to offer. Now, for a lot of Hexcrawl games, there will be really flavorful charts for determining how to populate certain hexes, or the hexes themselves will be limited in scope. Here, however, we have 200 hexes. Each one of these you can see labeled 0101, 0102, all the way going left to right, top to bottom, all fully detailed with a single page spread. It is really mind-boggling. First, we have a 2-page spread about how to read the format for a hex description. Of course, you need this, and of course, Gavin does a bang-up job with the layout and design here. We have an example hex inset into the first page here, numbered with corresponding entries. This basically gives you all the detail that you would need to know about how to read the hex. The hexes in Dolmenwood are basic 6-mile hexes, which is usually the standard length for Hexcrawl campaigns in classic and old school Dungeons and Dragons. So instead of going piece by piece through here, we're actually going to take a look at actual hexes. Now, of course, there are 200 hexes. I know it's a deep dive. I am not going to be going through all 200 hexes. That's just way too much. I have a selection of 3 hexes that I'd like to kind of go over because I have some sort of attachment to those hexes, hexes that I've had experience with or fun stories to relate, and how I use those hexes in my campaigns, I feel is the best way to sort of describe how these can be utilized, because I utilize them. So let's move through. So it starts with 101 and it goes all the way over to the eastern side of the map. So I'm going to skip ahead here to my first one that I want to detail. Just hex after hex after hex. We're still going. All right, we're going to stop here at hex 1108. Feast your eyes on the right-hand side of this spread here. Looper's Luncheon. Let's go detail by detail about how Gavin delivers the information for an individual hex, using this as our first example. First of all, the name of the hex. It's always evocative. Looper's Luncheon. What does that mean? We're about to find out. It gives you a brief description that you can immediately convey to your player characters the moments that they cross over into the hex. It is spoiler-free. Gloomy indigo-shadowed woods, teeming with croaking frogs and creeping toads. It's great. It gives you both a visual and an auditory description. There is always a map in the upper right-hand corner. I cannot tell you how useful this map is. First of all, it outlines the hex. It immediately shows you the hex in the center of the map, gives you the surrounding hexes to kind of place yourself in Greater Dolmenwood. Now, here's the genius of it. Each one of the 6 surrounding hexes on each side of the central hex is hyperlinked. So we are in 1108. If I click to the northeast, it is adjacent to 1207. So if your players tell you that they are determined to go northeast towards Fog Lake and you need to see what they're about to walk into, you can simply click on that hex and it will leap you to 1207 and you can immediately hyperlink back to Looper's Luncheon. That is the case for every single one of these hexes. And all 200 entries, all fully hyperlinked with adjacent hexes. It is marvelous for no page flipping if you're using the PDF, and easy access to information that you need at the tips of your fingers. Unbelievably useful. We have a sidebar up at the top that tells you what the terrain is. This is useful for determining how many travel points. It actually tells you the number of travel points that it takes to enter into the hex. 3 in this case for Tangled Forest, which is fantastic. And it tells you the region that you are in, the Old Wheel. This is useful both for conveying this information to the PCs, but also for determining what regional chart to roll upon when you generate a random counter in that region. Next, it gives you the chance for getting lost and for the chance for generating random encounters. So first thing you would do when you enter into the hex is you would check to see if you would get lost. You have a 2 in 6 chance. And then you would also check for daytime encounters, also a 2 in 6 chance. Then most of the entry for each hex will be dedicated to describing the features of that hex. As I discussed in part 1, going over the player's book and the rules for travel, if the feature is not labeled as hidden, that means that normal travel through that hex will allow the player characters to interact and find those features, barring if the features are clearly labeled as not being upon a road. Now, Looper's Luncheon, Hex 1108, is a completely wild hex. There is no road, so they're going to be wandering wild. So you could safely assume that the features here describing the Looping Wood and the Luncheon Arch, because they are not denoted as hidden, will be encountered by PCs simply traveling through the hex, regardless of which direction they are going. However, the last feature here, the Witch's Cave, is marked as hidden. That means that unless the PCs take the time to actually do the search action, which takes a number of travel points equal to the amount of travel points that was needed to enter the hex in the first place, in this case, 3, this feature will remain hidden and undiscovered by the PCs, right? So they have to, first of all, spend 3 points to enter into the Looper's Luncheon hex. Then they have to determine that their action in the hex is to search it, which will cost them another 3 points. So they have to have 6 points total in order to spend. And if they do that, they will uncover everything in this entry, including the Witch's Cave. Once a hidden feature is discovered in the hex, unless the entry itself says otherwise, they can re-find any previously hidden feature. Within each feature, let's take a look at the Looping Wood. This hex is referred to by villagers in the Woodcutter's encampment in Hex 1109, which is directly to the south, also hyperlinked, as the Looping Wood, and its uncanniness is immediately apparent to visitors. Every tree of any significant age has a trunk that is grown with one complete loop-the-loop in it about halfway up its length that automatically makes the forest itself, this particular small 6-mile hexagon of Dolmenwood, immediately unique. It gives a flavor to the actual trees within that forest and gives it context as well. It's not just fantastical for fantastical sake. There's a reason why there is this loop-the-loop in the large trunks, because of the lost art of looping. Shaping trees in this fashion, looping, was once one of the more exotic fernjing practices of the woodcutter's encampment. But the old-timers who started to maintain the trees in this process have long since passed away. It is uncertain whether the tradition or the name came to the area first. Lovely flavor, no real mechanical benefit, of course, but if the players want to engage with that, that immediately draws them to the woodcutter's encampment to find out more about fernjing, perhaps. So that particular feature is something that's general to the hex entirely. Then we have a more specific location-based feature here, the Luncheon Arch. So central to the hex, so regardless of where the PCs travel, they're going to encounter it, is a clearing with a miniature unsupported arch of well-dressed ancient stone, large enough for a crawling human or a stooped woodgrue to pass through. So immediately you have an item of interest that they're going to run across. They don't need to do anything active to discover. They're just going to run across this and probably pick up on it, investigate what this is. There's an inscription on the keystone. The keystone is heavily obscured by lichens, but cleaning it reveals an inscription: "To dine overnight will the daytime delight." A little riddle for the PCs to ponder, right? If foodstuffs are left under the arch and remain until dawn, they will be replaced by an exquisite version of the same edibles. And it gives examples of what those might be. And then if the PCs are smart enough to actually watch overnight, if they watch the arch overnight, they're going to hear a burbling voice after some time. The voice, at once bird-like and frog-like, firstly emits munching and chewing sounds, and then briefly complains about thankless tasks and gluttonous masters before the replacement dish appears. It's just wonderful little flavor. What it means, it's up to the referee if he really wants to, or maybe it's just passing flavor. I use this hex, 1108 Looper's Luncheon, as the location for the published Dolmenwood module, Winter's Daughter, which is highly regarded as one of the greatest starting adventures of all time. And I thought this worked really, really well. When both of my groups determined that there was nothing nefarious or dangerous about the luncheon arch, even though they were a bit bemused about what the nature of it was. They thought that this was a good camping spot for them then to explore the tomb in Winter's Daughter. So I definitely suggest using this hex as it's lightly featured as a good place to locate Winter's Daughter, especially if the base of operations for the party is Prigwort, because it's only about 2 hexes or so south of Prigwort in the wild. So the hidden feature, the Witch's Cave, which once again will only be revealed if the player characters determine that they want to spend the day searching, will be revealed. So the Swamp of Hag's Addle encroaches on the southern part of this hex in a region of dark willows and sodden ground. So it's in a particular end of the hex, right? A faint green glow and a strange heady aroma may be noticed emanating from a narrow cave mouth amid a pile of great boulders here. Then inside they have the chance of actually encountering a witch, Bragwin Hode. It tells you what her treasure is, what her lair looks like, and then we get a lovely NPC block, just like we described in the settlements chapter for this particular unique NPC. Which kind of witch is she? She is a servant of the Gwyrgon Hasturiel, right? This is one of the wood gods. It gives a full description, and it gives, and most important, of course, is always the desires. She desires magic items of all kinds. The return of her wand, which was stolen by the baker in Hex 1206. Seed for adventure right there. So if they treat Bragwin nice, if they treat with her nice, they can find out that she has this wand that was stolen by this nefarious baker. Probably point the PCs in the direction of where they can get that wand, and if they do so, they can return to the witch and probably have gained a very powerful ally. However, who knows what kind of shenanigans or things they're going to encounter in Hex 1206, which will be hyperlinked, and you can take a look at what that hex has to offer immediately. What kind of knowledge she has. Love this entry. This is fantastic. If the PCs end up asking the NPC for information, this is what she has. She knows about the stretch of the swamp in which the hag's hut can be found. That is good information. Bragwin Hode knows the details of the hex where the hag can be found. And she also knows about the luncheon arch itself, which is that feature that the PCs probably came across earlier. And then possessions and treasure should the PCs decide to do something rash and steal or slay this witch. That is a good example of the kind of detail that you're looking at in every single one of these hex descriptions. Once again, 200 of them. They vary wildly in the amount of detail and the amount of features in each hex. Some are lightly populated with features. Some are densely populated with features. There are some where there is only one feature, but that feature is heavily, heavily detailed. As an example, if you just look at the facing page, which is the hex to the north of Looper's Luncheon, so it's the hex in between Prigwort and the Looper's Luncheon, is the Worm Cave, which has the yellow bile worm Kazobride within. And you can see that the entire hex is dedicated only to the existence and lair of this yellow bile worm. Both groups have encountered the chasm where this worm lairs, but none of them had the cojones to actually investigate the chasm. Wisely, I might add. Well done, player characters. All right, let's take another look at a hex that I enjoyed running, which is Shub's Finger and Sturge Isle. If you were a member of my in-person group, you probably have very, very fond memories of this particular hex. So this is a hex that is rife with features. There's a lot going on in this hex, but look how quickly you were able to parse the information. All right, so we have the name. Hushed oak woods, birds and small mammals are markedly scarce, and a periodic groaning can be heard. That groaning is from the Groaning Loch, which is where this hex resides. You can see here that it is where the Groaning Lock narrows in its southwestern end before it makes the final run to Lake Longmere. It is to the west of Prigwort. Once again, if I want to take a look at the hex where Prigwort is, which is right next, I can just simply click on it, and voila, Prigwort in the Swinny Tower. Not a problem at all. All right, going back. It is Tangled Forest, so it costs 3 points to enter, and also 3 points to search. It's a part of the Aldweald. 2 and 6 chance of getting lost. 2 and 6 chance of random encounters. Here's a nice detail here. This is very common in a lot of hex descriptions. Encounters are 2 and 6 likely to be with 1d4 Sturge Owl, so oftentimes there will be an exception to the normal random encounter roll that is unique to the hex, which is really, really fun. So if I roll a 1 or 2 on a d6 and I determine that a random encounter does occur, then I would immediately roll another d6. And if I rolled a 1 or 2 on that, superseding the normal encounter charts, I would actually generate an encounter with 1d4 Sturge Owls, which are associated uniquely with this hex. We have a number of different features. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 different features that will be encountered or be interacted with by the party regardless of how they travel through the hex. And there is one hidden feature, the Shrine in the Cliffs, which they must spend 3 travel points in order to find. First, we have Shub's Finger. Close to the western side of the hex, there's a small rustic-looking pathway that forks off of the Swinny Road, which is the yellow line there on the hex, and leads south into the woods. There's a signpost, which is known as Shub's Finger, which is propped up against the stump of a dead elm. But it has really weird place names, indicates a different imaginary destination each time the PCs pass this way. I can invent something, or you can actually roll a d6 to determine what it says. And if you follow the path, none of those places exist. The path simply leads into the deep woods of 1006, which is to the south, which is a nasty, nasty hex, especially if you are male, the Witch Glade, which is on the following page. If you damage the signpost, it won't amount to anything. It will reappear intact the following morning. Really cool feature. It's a trap, basically. That Shub's Finger is a trap to lead men into the southern hex and destroy them, or lead women into the southern hex and possibly reward them. In the midst of the western end of the lock where it narrows is Sturge Isle. Really, really tall and really, really long, and it is a nesting ground of a bunch of Sturge Owls. It is bolded, so you can see that the bold entry will likely have a sidebar, and here we have Sturge Owls. So these are unique creatures to the hex. They are not in the monster book, but you have a fully detailed monster stat block here. What is Sturge Isle like in the springtime? Well, my in-person campaign actually did enter onto this isle during the springtime. The situation was they were actually at Harrowmore Keep talking to the Lady Harrowmore, who had recently captured a crookhorn, and they were trying to get information out of the crookhorn by torturous means, but the crookhorn was proving particularly resistant and would not tell them what they wanted to know about crookhorn forces to the north of the Groaning Lock. So she enlisted the PCs to go to Sturge Isle, knowing that these mysterious night boars, who are these astral creatures that actually manifest on top of this isle only and mate during springtime and harvest certain fluids that they may secrete during certain acts, knowing that these fluids, known as frisk, can actually be a truth-telling agent should they be ingested by people. Gross? Yes. Highly effective? Also yes. So this was a small little quest for those PCs. It was very, very enjoyable for everyone involved. Much laughter was had. And then we have the Groaning Lock itself, which is very dangerous, has no gnome bottom, is rife with kelpies, which are detailed in the monster book, and it's surrounded by cliffs and caves, which the echoing sound of the waters produces this groaning sound. And lastly, we have the Shrine in the Cliffs. My in-person party also discovered this because they decided to take the time to explore the hex. Lo and behold, what they find is one of the lost shrines, a statue to Saint Hollyhock. So if you clean out the lost shrine and restore it, you can see here, characters praying may receive the blessing of Saint Hollyhock, the ability to cast resist fire. So that is the associated spell with St. Hollyhock. And then it refers you to the page that we went over previously on page 24, where it details the rules for receiving these holy spells by restoring a shrine. So cool. It's like a nice little hidden feature, but you have to have the presence of mind to take the time to search. Players will quickly learn through experimentation that it is almost always worth the time to search, because there's usually something interesting that is hidden in the hex. But in typical old school fashion, it's always risk versus reward. Time is the great equalizer once again. Are you willing to take the time to search? Because you're probably going to have to rest. Resting out in the wild is dangerous. More chance for random encounters, more chance for weather screwing you over, right? More chance for getting lost the next day. You have to take that all into account. Do you think that the possible reward might be worth it? It usually is, because as you can see, Gavin's creativity is pretty top notch, and it's usually something fun that you can interact with and lead off onto new paths of adventure. Just crawling naturally through the hexes and seeing what you encounter and letting the campaign sort of wend its way and kind of build outwards. Lots and lots of fun. This is a great example of that in this particular hex. And lastly, let's take a look at Hex 0409. So my most recent campaign in person was focused in the High Wold and was very much focused on the interaction of the Breggle houses. We didn't get too far in this campaign, but what we did accomplish was mostly took place in this hex. And I wanted to highlight this hex as an example of what you as a referee can do to make Dolmenwood your own and to adapt other existing material or perhaps your own homebrew material into Dolmenwood and make it fit. So the hex here is the hamlet of Galblight. This is deep within the High Wold in the lands dominated by House Ramius, one of the Breggle lords. So you can see here, scents of onion and garlic, whorled ash trees sway over a rugged fern-infested forest floor. I established this immediately with my group. This is their starting hex. Their starting town was actually this hamlet of Galblight. So it is in hilly forest. Once again, 3 travel points to enter in the High Wold, 2 in 6 chance of getting lost or getting a random encounter. Here we have, there is a ley line that actually runs through this hex. You can see in the map, it is labeled Ewer. It is the southwest to northeast line, and it tells you the details for it. Arcane spellcasters perceive the distant moaning of the dead. It also points you to the page where you can find out more information about the ley line Ewer, and it is hyperlinked, as you can see, and drops you right here where you can find out what the spell enhancement is for that line. Amazing. It also tells you that foraging here, you can do foraging in any one of the hexes and just use the normal foraging rules on their 2-page spread, but here there is a unique aspect. Successful foraging yields 1d2 portions of garlic in addition to the normal results. That was already telegraphed in the actual description of the hex itself that you would convey to player characters. It gives you a brief overview of this very small hamlet of Galblight, which is Breggle dominated, and an NPC block on the captain who rules over this, Captain Lockhorn, and the services at the Manish Miser, which is the inn. You can see that it has a particular delicacy, badger's tongues. They're pickled in bitter garlic butter, so it's a unique dish that you can find only at the Manish Miser. Tells you that they have utterly terrible wine and gives you the prices for any of the services. So there are small little details about the hamlet itself, just enough to kind of give it some flavor. It doesn't get a full settlement write-up, of course, but there is a little hitch here, a little adventure that you might be able to have. At night, there's a 2 in 6 chance of encountering a hunting party of 2d4 sleepwalking shorthorn Breggles in the woods or in Galblight itself. So there are sleepwalkers in town that have actually been charmed by this beast 1 hex over known as the Bicorn. And they are being led away from town to the Bicorn's lair where they can be devoured. So that's really cool. That's a seed for adventure right there, investigating why you're encountering these sleepwalkers. This actually occurred with my party. So what I did is I was looking for a place to insert the unrelated adventure called The Black Worm of Brandonsford by Chance Dudenak, which I will have a link for in the video description below. Because that adventure has a very strong Dolmenwood fairytale forest vibe to it, it would fit really, really well with just a little bit of work. So I was looking for a particular hex where I could fit it. And I realized that Galblight could actually be Brandonsford, which is the town that's under duress in that module. if I changed all the human NPCs in that module to Bregel, it would work just fine. And I basically combined the conflicts that are in that module with the existing conflict here in the written description in the Dolmenwood book, which is the sleepwalking shorthorns. And I basically made that another dilemma that the PCs had to discover and solve. Now, they may correct me in retrospect upon seeing this video, but I'm pretty confident that they had no idea that I conflated that module with the hex description itself and combined those dilemmas together and interwove them. But it was extremely easy to do because all of the action of that module is in a very small area. So they didn't have to expand outwards from this pre-existing hex. The entire module could take place within this 6-mile hex with very, very little work and integrate it fully into the larger campaign seamlessly without anyone ever knowing the difference. It worked fantastic. So those are just 3 examples of the 200 hexes that are fully detailed out in the campaign book. There are 197 more than what I have just described to you as we scroll through them here. It goes on and on and on, all fully hyperlinked for easy navigation, each dripping with multiple adventure hooks. And it's just an endless campaign. You can see now why there is no real reason to detail anything further out beyond the bounds of the map in the game itself. Yes, you can place it in your own world, but believe me, you do not need to go further than the bounds of Dolmenwood itself. And I was very upfront with my players upon establishing those boundaries at the beginning of the campaign. I laid out the map on the table, and I told them, you are not allowed to go beyond the borders of this map. This campaign will take place entirely on this map. I don't have any compunction about doing that. I like laying out those boundaries early in the campaign and setting those expectations, and no one ever complained. I don't think anyone was yearning to leave the wood. There's just too much there. Years upon years of high adventure. Whew, okay. Part 6, Campaigns in Dolmenwood. We're moving into a section here near the back end of the book, past all the hex descriptions, where there is still a lot of work that Gavin is working on. So we're going to be seeing a lot of blank spaces, a lot of sections that say to do, but the intent of what Gavin intends to put in here is relatively evident. So let's take a look at what we have to show here. In this chapter, Campaigns in Dolmenwood, this is basically your Dungeon Master's Guide part of the book, right? This is where all of your referee advice is, how to run games in Dolmenwood. And because this is a complete game, not just a setting, he doesn't assume any knowledge whatsoever on the referee's part that you know how to run a role-playing game. So he gives a lot of really, really useful advice on old school play and how to run a role-playing game in that style. First of all, here we have referee advice. So you can see here that this is not written yet. However, he's made some general notes. I love the fact that one of his notes here is check out the AD&D DMG for ideas on what to include. This is the way. That is some really good advice for himself, because that is a book that is a wellspring of good ideas. But we can see here that he's going to have notes on adventure design, dungeon design, lots of tables, secret doors. We're going to see actually some of these things have actually been fleshed out already, but I'm looking forward to seeing what he ends up writing here. Awarding XP. So this is going to give the rules for how we reward XP in the old school style. So it's going to be XP for gold, which is central to old school style. And you can see here that he's going to have an explanation of why that is the case. Unlike other versions of classic D&D where that it goes unexplained, he's actually going to detail out the design reasons why this is an effective means for rewarding XP. The gameplay loop of going out and seeking out treasure in order to gain XP, where you gain much more experience points from loot that you are able to bring back to a safe haven rather than the XP that you get for defeating monsters. Therefore, it's all about avoiding combat, moving around obstacles to get to the treasure, because that's where the good XP is. It looks like he's also going to provide some optional rules or maybe baseline rules for rewarding XP for exploration, which I really, really like. Anyone who is fans of our Halls of Arden Bull run will know that I really enjoy giving XP for exploratory milestones. And we have a number of campaign themes. This is going to be really effective. I'm really looking forward to the full spread of this, but just what he has here is so interesting. So this is really helpful for a referee that may not have any ideas of what the overall theme of a certain campaign can be. Dolmenwood could be so many different things, right? It can be horror, it can be fairy tale whimsy, it can be political intrigue, right? So how do you decide what it's going to be for your group? Are you going to be complete player agency and it's just going to be about exploring the hexes and just see what sort of mysteries unfold? I like that a lot, actually. That's kind of what I prefer. If you want a more detailed arc for the campaign itself, you might want to focus on one of these themes. So we see here, one of them is intrigue in the High Wold. I have not read this, actually, but this is basically what I decided to do with my latest short-lived campaign in Dolmenwood, which is this. The High Wold region in the southwestern Dolmenwood is a powder keg, rife with political tension and bitter rivalry that could explode into war at any moment. The region and its conflicts are the perfect backdrop for a campaign heavy on political intrigue, skullduggery, and warfare. So if you have a group of players, ask them what kind of themes they are into, and then you can probably marry them to something in Dolmenwood and run with it. If they're into that kind of stuff, let's drop them in the High Wold and get them neck deep in the intrigues of the Bregel lords. And then he gives you possible events with references. Lord Merkin on page 67, probably going to be hyperlinked, sends his secret army in Hex 0109 to attack Nodding Castle in Hex 0210, coveting House Nodlock's domain for his own. The Lax Baron Hogwarsh fails to respond, so Duke Brackenwold is forced to intercede. Lord Ramius maneuvers to take over Merkin's domain. Lord Malbleet secretly allies with Merkin, attempting to assassinate Lord Ramius by occult means. Now, if you're just reading that for the first time as a referee, that might just be a mishmash of names that you don't understand at all, but he gives you the references and the hyperlinks to go discover more about them, and then it will all make sense. I know what all these names means, and this to me looks like an awesome campaign that I would love to run or play in. How do you get the PCs involved with it? They could be allied with any of the involved noble houses. They could act as spies, assassins, or lieutenants, or alternatively, they may form a mercenary company fighting on the side of the highest bidder. Really, really cool. And you can see that we're going to get further entries that are an Inquisition, right? The Church versus the Droon or the Witches. The Return of the Cold Prince. That's a fantastic one. That's always waiting in the wings. Restoration of the Church, acting as church agents to restore the power of the Church, probably interacting with the ruined Abbey of St. Cloud. The War with the Tideway, perhaps servants of House Harrimore, venturing across the Groaning Loch and infiltrating the Naglord's realm, right? Recurring mysteries. These are great. Just reminding the referee that there are certain mysteries that pervade throughout the hex descriptions that you'll come across as you read the descriptions, and you realize as you're hyperlinking in between hexes that this is actually a running theme is really, really fun. One of these is Duidort of Smyrn. This guy is fantastic. He was a highway robber who has now turned into a ghost, and he haunts the roads of Dolmenwood, and he has a lost hoard, and finding the clues to where his lost hoard is will take you all over Dolmenwood. It's like basically a Dolmenwood spanning campaign, all about just retracing what happened to this highway robber and where he ended up hiding his hoard. It's a lot of fun. It's very, very funny. You're interacting with a lot of really fun characters. It's great. And then we have a section here on designing dungeons. Now, you can see here that is unfinished. However, just recently, for Patreons like myself, we got access to his first workup of the full section for this, which is really cool. This is a great example of general refereeing, game mastering advice that you could probably take into and use in any old school game. We have a section here on designing dungeons with a clear procedure. Determine the form of the dungeon with a chart. Choose the denizens. Map the dungeon. Stock the dungeon. And he gives you clear examples and instructions about how to do this on a 2-page spread. The dungeon form can be caverns or tunnels like we see in a lot of different games, right? Or it can be something a little bit more unique to Dolmenwood, perhaps in a giant tree or thicket, or in a giant mushroom, right? Interesting. Choose denizens. You can use the dungeon denizens table, which he's got on the following page here, to stock all of your dungeon levels. What are the creatures doing? We have a chart for that as well. Mapping the dungeon. He's going to give you a table here, unfinished at the moment, of dungeon mapping symbols. Stocking the dungeon with a ratio of treasure and traps and creatures, right? And he gives you a sidebar here of an optional rules for determining what is going to be in a room randomly, and then how to actually describe areas within the dungeons and how to determine what treasure is going to be in given rooms. Just excellent all around good advice for creating a dungeon on the fly. Here's a section on dungeon denizens, which it points you to at one stage of dungeon creation, how to place them, how to create factions for multiple groups of creatures that are in the dungeon, what the layers are going to look like, how to roll for wandering mounters. Here's the procedure for rolling an encounter in a dungeon. Here's what they might be doing, which I like. This is an optional one, but I think a very, very useful chart, especially if you're having a little bit of brain freeze when you're creating. So if you roll, for instance, on level 1, that there are going to be some giant rats, well, what are they doing? If you roll an 18, they're sleeping. Or you roll a 20, they're washing, right? Something like that. And here also, this is where the level of the creature from the monster book actually comes in real handy, because you can quickly look at the level of the creature and determine that that probably coincides with the level of the dungeon in true old school style. So a level 1 creature is most likely to be found on the first level of a dungeon. We have a 2-page spread on the dungeon environment itself. This is some unique stuff here. I really like this. He gives a whole section here dedicated to an option to introduce dungeon adversity. This is the notion prevalent in a lot of OSR games where the underworld itself has a sentience to it, where it is actively hating the adventurers that have decided to trespass within it. And so it gives rules for doors always being stuck or closing behind you, all creatures within the dungeon actually being able to see, but you can't, and you need light. Those sort of adversarial dungeons, really, really nasty. And then we got some charts here for common fungi. All of these have fully detailed entries elsewhere in the book, plants as well. And then we have this really cool section on molds and slimes. So Gavin has taken the route where molds and slimes are not going to be detailed as creatures. They are actually more like hazards or obstacles. So they act more like traps, for instance. They are triggered if you touch or damage them, and then there is a 3 in 6 chance, 50% chance of the mold emitting a cloud of spores in a 10-foot cube. If that happens, everyone has to save versus blast, or they get the effect of the mold. And then how you actually remove them basically takes time. And then he gives you an example of a few different kinds of mold and what they do. These are actually, some of them, these are actually pretty unique and quite nasty. Traps, of course. We have a 2-page spread here with a different kind of traps, both architectural traps, otherwise known as room traps, mechanism traps, otherwise known as treasure traps, how to interact with them, different effects and mechanical effects. And very important here, which I think is an essential information to get across in any old school game, is exploration and clues. A party moving at exploration speed is assumed to be carefully inspecting the environment. The referee may give the players clues as to the presence of traps, drawing their attention to features that warrant further investigation. I am a huge proponent of this method of refereeing, to telegraph to the players the possible existence or clues that a trap is somewhere in the room, because it is a lot more fun to interact with a trap as a puzzle than as a gotcha. We have a 1-page spread here for secret doors, the types that they are. I love this. Oftentimes it's so hard to come up with, well, how does the door actually operate? Well, he gives you a D20 chart of what the door actually looks like, and then 2 more D20 charts about how to actually open them, whether mechanically or magically. Here, once again, he has a section here, which I highly encourage all referees to take who are playing the old school style. Clues. Give the player clues about the secret doors, visual, functional, symbolic. If they are paying attention, they will pick up on you telegraphing those clues, and they will investigate further. The penalty is the time spent investigating, right? Higher chance of wandering encounters. However, the possible reward is almost always worth it, and it's just fun to see players interact with interesting parts of the dungeon environment. Speaking of interesting parts of the dungeon environment, tricks and weirdness, right? So tricks, puzzles, riddles, and magical weirdness can add an additional element of mystery and excitement to a dungeon, challenging players' creativity and imagination. I love this. This is so great. So we have sections here on architectural tricks like shifting walls, trick doors, illusory features like illusory walls, teleporting. That's a huge part of Arden Boole, actually. Riddles and clues, and magical weirdness. And he's got a chart here of magical qualities for introducing some weirdness into the dungeon. Very, very fun and evocative. And this whole section on dungeon creation is just marvelous. It is so helpful for not only a starting referee, but also for a veteran referee, with good reminders and prompts for dungeon creation. And the last full chapter before the appendices is part 7, Treasures and Oddments. Always my favorite part of any referee's manual for any role-playing game. We have an unfinished section here for treasure types. We went over how this is demarcated in the monster book. So we have coins marked by C, riches marked by R, and magic items marked by M, all scaled from 1 to 12. And as you can see here, the higher the number on the chart, the higher the chance of the treasure existing in the lair, the higher the value of the items in the lair, and the higher usually the quantity as well. Then in the following pages, we have the detail for each one of these categories. So gems and art objects. You have a simple chart here, which just gives you a basic breakdown of how valuable the gems are. However, you can also roll on the gem type table. This is very much a first edition Dungeon Master's Guide sort of chart. It's purely for flavor, but I really like giving this to players if possible. Art objects, even more necessary in my mind to actually roll on this D100 chart of what the object is. Oftentimes, these will only take up one slot or a minimal amount of weight when it comes to encumbrance. However, depending on what you actually roll here, it may not, especially if you get something like furniture. Amulets and talismans have yet to be detailed. Magic armor, however, is fully detailed, and we have a number of interesting things here. First of all, I noted this, which is really, really unique. The enchantment of armor. All magic suits of armor and shields grant the wielders a +2 armor class bonus. That's it. It's +2. There's no +1. There's no +3. There is no scaling bonuses for magical armor. All magic armor, regardless of its other powers, are all +2 to armor class. I love this. I think this is fantastic. It's just always +2. You know this. Your players know that. They can just bank on that, knowing that. And then they shunt that aside, and they're more focused upon what the more interesting, evocative powers are with the armor. There's nothing more boring than coming across a suit of leather armor +1 or a sword +1. It needs to have something more evocative to make it truly unique and interesting. And Gavin has done that very elegantly by just saying everything has a +2. Now forget about that. Let's move on to the interesting parts. Love it. So you can see that there are 3 different types of enchantment. Arcane, constructed by mighty wizards, fairy, constructed by fairy smiths, of course, and holy, that are anointed in a sacred spring or blessed by a holy person. Each of these makes the armor appear differently, of course. There is a chance of a special power if encountered randomly. Very, very small, of course, and there's also a small chance of being cursed. And if you actually hit that chance, then you can actually roll on these tables, which correspond to these entries right here. And there's a lot of really fun ones. This reminds me very much of the first edition Dungeon Master's Guide. Let's look at tirelessness, armor of tirelessness. So you know right away that it's going to be armor +2. Who cares? The wearer may ignore the normal need for rest when traveling. It's great. In a Hexcrawl campaign, it's huge. We have a similar section for magic weapons. You can determine what type of weapon that you're going to get. It also has the same sorts of enchantment, arcane, fairy, and holy, and then similar chances for actually having a special power. Each of these is also unique. You can see here that all magic weapons grant the wielder a +2 bonus to attack and damage. An interesting little mechanical note here. If a missile that is magic is fired from a magic weapon, both the enchantments apply, so they basically stack. So he says, for example, if you have an arrow that is magical, which is +2, because they're all +2, is fired from a magic bow, which is also +2, because all weapons are +2, it grants a +4 bonus to attack and damage. That's pretty nasty. Then we have these special powers. So martial, once a day, may be raised aloft to counteract fear in allies within 20 feet. Those afflicted with magical fear must save versus doom to regain their courage. We have a yet to be completed section on magic crystals. This should be pretty interesting. You can see that Gavin is a big fan, as am I, of ion stones, which is very much a Vancian creation. So we have some notes here on ion stones. We have this interesting one here that he's actually detailed out, the Crystal of Sepulture. It's a faceted ovoid crystal that's placed in a case or cabinet and rotates slowly and absorbs the souls of any sentient being that dies within a 240-foot radius. Holy crap. Trap souls can only be released by the caster, but can be used as an arcane battery, powering an ongoing enchantment of great power. Awesome. Magic rings, yet to be filled out. Potions, we've got a whole bunch of potions here. These all appear to be unique to Dolmenwood, which I like a lot. We have a nice table here that gives you a summary of the effect and their value. A little sidebar here about how to identify them. Let's see if it's the old school way. Yep, characters bold enough to take a small sip of a potion can also gain a hint as to its effects. I love it. Let's look at Essence of Springtime. A clear liquid with the odor of a fresh spring day. Taste of cherry blossom. The effect, it reverses the effects of aging, causing a mortal or demifade to become 10 years younger. Fairies have to save versus doom or fall into a coma for 2d6 days. That's super cool. I like that a lot. What I like about this section as well, and something that I always have a very difficult time coming up on the fly, is that it gives you a description of what the potion looks like and what it tastes like or smells like, as well as just the mechanical effect. It's so helpful for a referee. I love it. Section on oils and balms, and it looks like Gavin's going to take a look at the Unearthed Arcana from AD&D to source some of those. Looks pretty cool. Love it. A whole section on musical instruments. Going to be great for minstrels. Scrolls and books, got to have it. Wands and staves, and wondrous items, always the most fun part of any treasure section. We have a unique section here for rare herbs. So there are herbs, plants and fungi and herbs scattered throughout the books, right? But here are the particularly rare ones and their values. Really cool here is that it also gives you the summary of effects, but it gives you a hyperlinked location where you can actually find these herbs within Dolmenwood. This is fantastic. I have used one of these to great effect, as at least for a quest item, basically, is Knobbled Mandrake. I actually house ruled this a little bit. So Knobbled Mandrake are hand-sized roots, broadly humanoid in form, covered in knobbly protrusions, alike to extra heads. Kind of gross. They squirm gently, sigh, and then go still when they're plucked from the earth. And they have a plum-like odor and a taste of dung. So great evocative description for each one of these herbs. And then it gives you the effect if you eat the thing. A missing bodily appendage begins to regrow. A small appendage, a finger, regrows 1 week after assuming the mandrake. Full restoration of larger appendages requires additional portions of Knobbled Mandrake. That's super cool. So that basically circumvents the need to have like a restoration spell of some sort or a regeneration spell, right? As there is a naturally occurring herb within Dolmenwood that can be the seed for an adventure or the end goal of an adventure. This occurred in my most recent campaign, the one focused on the Bregel Lords in the High Wold, where the player characters ended up slaying the black worm of Galblight in this case. But in so doing, one of the Bregel player characters actually shattered their leg when they leaped upon the dragon's back. Now, in the typical old school fashion, it is not easy to heal a shattered leg. It doesn't matter if you get back to full hit points. It's not going to make you be able to walk again all of a sudden. So they had to figure out how to get this guy back into fighting shape so that he could go adventure. This led to a whole different vector to the campaign simply because of a bad roll in the midst of combat. So they determined that they were not going to get the answers they seek about how to quickly heal a broken leg from the small populace of this little town of Galblight. So they looked at the map to determine where could they go that would have someone who would probably have the required knowledge. And they immediately pinpointed the Castle Everdusk, which is the home of Lord Ramius. They go to the Lord Ramius and they wheel and deal and make promises that they probably shouldn't have. And they find out that there are people in High Hankle who might be able to help them, the capital of the High Wold. And this leads them down the road with a couple of adventures on the side down to High Hankle, where they interact with the Order of St. Cygnus, and they find out that they can't help them either. But they get word that on the black market, there is a root that is known as Knobbled Mandrake. Are they willing to actually interact with the seedy underbelly of High Hankle in order to get this Knobbled Mandrake? And the adventure goes on from there. Very, very fun. All stemming from just a simple entry here in the rare herbs section. Rare fungi as well. Lots of interesting stuff here. Same basic format as the herbs. Lover's Gasp, tiny pink mushrooms with delicate pointed caps and long stringy stems, have a faintly floral odor and taste of sand. And if you eat them, a handful grants a +1 bonus to charisma with respect to a single specific individual who must be visualized while the portion of mushrooms is slowly consumed. Rare comestibles, food, drink, pipe leaf, and drugs. This is a half-finished chart here, but you can see the summary of effects. There's a lot of interesting stuff here. In my campaign, we had a lot of interaction with Azoth, which is residue of crystals around Fog Lake. I placed the non-related module, the Incandescent Grottos, and I adapted it for Dolmenwood at Fog Lake. I think that's a pretty common practice for veteran Dolmenwood referees, is to adapt that module for Fog Lake. There's an association with crystals, both with that hex in Dolmenwood and with the module, the Incandescent Grottos, which makes it basically a perfect place to put that module. And there is an NPC that you encounter when you get to Fog Lake that is collecting Azoth for his master. And we had a whole huge campaign subplot based purely around the existence and harvesting of Azoth at Fog Lake, separate from the Incandescent Grottos. Enchanted Oddments, not a lot of hint as to what these might be. Let's see, we have Crystal Illusions, Eternal Flowers, Frozen Birdsong, Unicorn Horn. Okay, really, this is going to be a really cool section. This is going to be highly unique to Dolmenwood. I'm very much looking forward to seeing what this stuff does. I have a feeling it's going to be very, very small effects mechanically, but very, very evocative and immersive. Should be really cool. Trade goods, let's see, move here from the Dolmenwood Monster Book. Okay, so he's thinking about actually taking that section from the Monster Book and putting it here. We'll see what he ends up deciding. And the very last chapter in the book, the Appendices, Part 8. So let's see what interesting stuff are in the Appendices. As we discovered in the past 2 books, the Appendices is where a lot of juicy material actually can be found. I love it. All useful, not just vestigial. So first up, we have general rumors. Oh my gosh, this is so useful. So these are Dolmenwood-wide rumors at first. You can see that at the end of every entry, it tells you whether or not it is true, false, or if the veracity is undefined, perhaps. And you can see that we have a lot of interesting, fun stuff here. This is great for when player characters enter into a cosmopolitan area or perhaps into an inn where there's a lot of different folk from different parts of the wood all talking and they want to just listen to rumors. Or if you as a referee want to drop a hint to the players, you can use this easily and it'll just take them in a random direction towards adventure. Just another way to drop an adventure seed. So Spies of the Cold Prince, if you roll number 10. There are reports of frost-clad fairies upon the roads of Dolmenwood, undoubtedly servants of the Cold Prince. It is claimed that these frigid elves will trade icy jewels and fairy silver in exchange for information about what goes on in the deep woods. And that is true. That's super cool. The Master Bladesmith in Lankshorn. I've used this guy to great effect in all of my campaigns, although they have yet to actually meet this guy. The finest bladesmith in Dolmenwood makes his home in Lankshorn. In addition to normal swords of exquisite make, he sells weapons of pure iron, which is harmful to fairies. This is true. He is Jormy Wilpston Puddingfoot, and he is a highly desirable NPC to interact with for obvious reasons. So you got 20 of these general Dolmenwood rumors right here. Fantastic. Then we have settlement rumors, and it looks like we're going to have a D20 chart for every single one of the 16 settlements. This is fantastic. I like the fact that they are not in the main settlement entries so that you can just go right to the rumors section and find what you need very, very quickly. Dragon Shantywood Isle has a full workup. So we have this sleeping sword. An enchanted sword hangs in the halls of Fernable House. Any struck by it fall into a deep slumber for 100 years. This is partly true. A magical sword does indeed hang in the manor, though its powers are somewhat misunderstood. This is a really cool rumor. I've actually interacted with this rumor in one of my campaigns. That you discover the rumor in Dragon Shantywood Isle. However, it relates to a nearby hex, Fernable House, which is actually more associated with the Woodcutters encampment. And we have it for all of the main settlements. Great. We have a section of new spells. It's short, but they're very, very evocative. Some of them are centered around baking for a particular baker, which is in a hex next to Prigwort. Not going to go into too much detail about that, but it's very, very fun. And we have a yet to do section on using other materials. So it looks like using old school essentials or other old school materials with Dolmenwood with some conversion guidelines. This is great. I love this. So this is a complete role-playing game. It isn't in the old school style though, and Gavin does not shy away from that. And so he's going to have some guidelines to convert back and forth or use material from his other really well-known work, which is the old school essentials rules, or perhaps even other old school materials on the market from other publishers, which is really, really cool. I like that a lot. And at the very end, we have the index. And this is not like other indices in a lot of other role-playing games. He actually divides it into sections, which is interesting. And I think that this would be quite useful. So we have the very first section is every single character on a 2-page spread from A to Z. And you can see this is every single NPC in the book that has that sort of sidebar description. And there's a lot, as you can see. Unbelievable. Classed NPCs. Interesting. Clergy, magic users, monsters. These look to be the monsters that actually have stat blocks in the campaign book specifically, not the monster book. And there's a lot. This is all in addition to the monsters that are in the monster book itself. Sages. This is so useful because oftentimes player characters want to know about where they can find out more information from a professional. Well, here they all are listed. The 16 settlements and where all the standing stones are, each one of their descriptions. And lastly, it looks like there's going to be a glossary of Dolmenwood specific terms and the credits. And that will do it for our deep dive into the campaign book for referees for the Dolmenwood tabletop role-playing game, by far the largest of the 3 books. I sincerely hope that you have enjoyed this series of deep dives into the 3 books of the upcoming Dolmenwood tabletop role-playing game, currently in Kickstarter as of the taping of this video. It is definitely one of my all-time favorite, if not my most favorite setting for any role-playing game. And I have had innumerable great adventures playing within this setting and using these rules. I just love it. It just hits all of my buttons when it comes to my preferred play style and how I like to run games. And I can speak from experience that my players have enjoyed it immensely as well. Even those who have come to the game from more modern sensibilities have really gravitated toward what Dolmenwood presents as an ideal form of play. So we really have something to look forward to here. I can't wait to see it on the shelves. There's probably going to be a third-party license for it and a lot more material produced by it, both by Necrotic Gnome and by third-party publishers. And so the sky's the limit with this setting, and it's going to be here for a long time. I really do firmly believe that this is going to be a watershed mark in the role-playing industry. It is going to set the standard for what a quality role-playing game looks like for many, many years to come. I firmly believe that. So you should definitely head over to the Dolmenwood page on necroticgnome.com, which I will link below in the video description, and grab your free 76-page preview of Dolmenwood, where you can see a lot of this information for yourself. And then look forward to seeing this game on the shelves in about a year's time, hopefully. And if you're watching these videos far in the future after Dolmenwood has already been released and you've already enjoyed many high adventures in the wood itself, please comment below and let me know how it went. I want to hear about everyone's adventures. I'm so excited to learn about how other referees and players have interacted with this game and this world. It's going to be so great to see. I can't wait. And don't forget, you've been watching this on 3D6 Down the Line. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, hit the bell icon for notifications, share amongst your friends and family as well. And you can watch our 22-episode long Dolmenwood campaign and our ongoing Halls of Ardent Vul Mega Dungeon campaign on 3d6downtheline.com, your podcatching platform of choice, and YouTube, of course. Thank you all so much for watching, and have a great rest of your day. Take care. Bye.